Please, I have the correct buttons here. Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the library. I have to look more closely at my stream deck for the next few streams. I think last time at the end of the stream, I noticed some of my buttons were kind of flashing with this new message saying a device wasn't supported. Very strange. Two different sets of buttons, both related to a plugin authored by a group, or at least with the group name of Bar Raider. Great group, makes awesome, very visually appealing plugins. The best, like OBS scene changer, certainly, in my opinion. As long as you were able to use sort of the default images, if you made it like a part of a multi-action, then you kind of lose the sort of dynamic image that it presented. For instance, you have I have 6 scenes to swap between, right? Amongst the various ones, and if I'm in studio mode, then in OBS you have a preview view and a program view, or the live view, and program one is the one that goes to stream or goes to record, and preview one you can bring up on the left, and you can you play around with it, fiddle it, make an adjustment, or just queue it up ready to go. And in the Bar Raider, you would hit whatever scene you want to stick in the preview, and if that scene is in preview, the next time you hit that button, it'll flip it over to the program view. And it gave you the little outline color for the preview and an outline color for the program, depending on what button was where. Really functional. The default OBS plugin, because Elgato also releases a plugin for OBS themselves, they have a decent one. It'll recognize which scene is live or which scene is programmed. And if you press a button and you are in studio mode, it will load a scene up into the preview, but it won't do anything else. The Stream Deck does give you the option to program multiple actions into a button, so you can press it once, or double tap, or press and hold. But that, like the multi-action, will hide the sort of the default appearance of the button on the deck, and you have to put your own thing in there, and then you lose that functionality of, okay, well, what's where. So right now what I have is I have the OBS Studio one. It has the 6 buttons, and they're all red if they're not the program or the current scene, and then green if they are. And so if I'm in studio mode, if I click a button here, I switch to that, I have a problem in that I will also need to sort of transition manually in order to affect a change. So yeah, it's a trade-off. It works, but not as nicely as I would like it to. I don't know what happened with the Bar Raider ones. I do notice they communicate with OBS, and so did StreamerBot, through something called a WebSocket. Think of it as making a phone call to OBS to tell it what to do and get information from it, and that's what the programs would do. And it would appear and disappear and appear and disappear, this connection, because OBS shows you what active connections currently exist, and they would kind of appear and disappear, kind of the same way that it would say, hey, device not supported, and then go back to normal on the Stream Deck. So that's been removed, and so is the other one with Voicemeeter, which was a real problem for me because there are no other plugins for Voicemeeter. I had to solve it a different way. It turns out, thankfully, that Voicemeeter also has a number of other software products that they package in with Voicemeeter. It's not just the audio interface, the software audio interface. One of them is called Macro Buttons or something. One of them, it's a name here somewhere. Yeah, Macro Buttons for their software. And essentially what that does is it will let you program actions that Voicemeeter will listen to through a sort of remote API, and then let you assign those to your operating system's various keybinds. So one of the really cool things about keybinds these days, you know how you have your function keys, you have F1 to F12 normally across the top of your keyboard. There is F13 to F24 as well. They exist virtually They're not on the keyboard, but they're like just extra hotkeys that you can bind onto your system, and then somehow call them from software rather than your keyboard. And so that's what I have done. And so I have 4 buttons, because I have 2 global mute buttons, right? I think I've talked about this before. One of those is the system mic in OBS. That's the one that broadcasts to recordings or to streams like I'm doing now. And another one is the voice meter microphone, which is the same microphone, but it goes into the voice meter software, which is what I hear or what I send to voice chat conferencing, all that kind of jazz. And so I needed a way to globally mute those and globally unmute those. And yeah, there is a button and it will toggle, and you can have it mute and unmute by pressing the button over and over again. But there's no feedback information that I'm aware of. So there's no way of knowing which state the mute is currently in. So what I have a button that will mute it and a button that will unmute it. And that's set to like F23 and Alt F23 and then 24 and Alt 24 respectively. And so I have a toggle button in Stream Deck. Regardless of what state voice meter is in, Stream Deck will just assign the next state to it, change button appearance accordingly, and it will sync up that way. So I've elaborated dramatically upon what I've done in Stream Deck. No one asked me for that. So there you are. You are welcome. My streaming profile in this thing is full. I have 2 spare buttons currently. There are many pages, of course. So that's just that one page. But yeah, fun times. That took me until like 11:30 or something to sort of finalize. More importantly, our lovely cat Gwen is now free from her onesie. She is roaming about the house, and she spent like, what was it, Valana, an hour and a half cleaning herself. After we wiped her down, there was a lot of sort of gunk on her belly, old scabs, I am assuming dead skin and all that kind of jazz. She spent like a ton of time cleaning herself. She's going to have a mega fur ball, guaranteed. We'll happily take that. Yeah. She's at it some more. She's going to be at it for days, right? And also, well, obviously the rest of her life. That's cats for you. But yeah. Oh, I don't care. We are back to being almost normal. Give her 6 months for the fur to grow in. Kind of, you can't really expect that to be cool that way. But she is going to be back to normal very, very soon. She was already crawling around on shoulders and purring and all that kind of jazz. So she is back to normal in my opinion. She just looks a wee bit funny. Just a whittle funny. And oh yes, of course, how could I forget? It is confirmed she does not have cancer. The growth they found was benign, and it was just part of the lymph nodes and stuff like that. So our kitty cat is healthy, much happier now too. So yay, very happy household. I also found out that I don't have to work the public set on Tuesday. That's also important. I think that's important. There was a chance we were going to have to go in, but there are other roadblocks preventing us from doing that at work. I do have to go in Friday morning, but for a much less dramatic change. I just want to be present for it. Yeah. Last time upon at Sid Reed's, there might be a gorilla. We'll see. Last time we did extra streams because it was holidays. Sid got overwhelmed with the recordings, so we'll see. Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe Chibi wants to stream Satisfactory or something. Like, I wouldn't mind doing that, but yeah, I would have to talk to him for that to happen. Not suggesting I'm not talking to him. Just, that conversation hasn't occurred yet. That's all. It's just like, everyone calm down. Maybe Sid watches friend streams. Yeah, maybe Sid watches friend streams. Or maybe Sid just plays games by himself or something. Stuff and things. stuff and things. Maybe I move my microphone a little further away so my mouth can close a bit more often. That looks better. Cool. All right. Now, last time we read H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. We read up to, unfortunately, the second last chapter of book 1, which I just like only thought of after I ended stream. We should have read one more chapter. There is an itch in the back of my brain that will never be scratched now, and I blame Valana. Yep, blame Valana. It's her fault. So now, just like 1984, I'm going to have this odd stream or recording up on YouTube where it's like, hey, here is all these chapters from part whatever, and then one chapter from the previous part. It was a little late, I guess. We only got through 6 chapters, so either the chapters got bigger or I got slower. But we read the same amount of time, I believe. Yeah. So tonight we're going to start with, was it chapter 17 of book 1, and then continue through book 2 for however long we go, and we'll finish up where we finish up. That means that the last chapter, the last stream, or the next stream, which I guess will be Monday at this rate, might be a short reading stream, and we might do one or two things. We either, I want to start reading some SCP stuff, kind of break from the novels for a little bit. I'd be a little more flexible because with the holidays coming up, I'm going to be a little more relaxed with what I do with streaming. I might end up just playing more games. Take a little break from reading perhaps, but we'll see. We'll see how interesting the SCP stuff is. But we might use the SCP stuff to sort of fill in Monday's stream if we end up sort of in a position where the War of the Worlds is finished too quickly, kind of idea, right? So if we only take like an hour to finish the War of the Worlds, for example, we can fill that time in with some SCP or Space Marines. We'll see how I feel. If we go by how I feel, probably be Space Marines, but also kind of gaming and reading are definitely different fields. I kind of want to respect that the reading streams are designed to be quieter. I put the ASMR tag on them, and I think in today's culture, online culture, that generally means, hey, I know I'm gonna respect people's quiet, cozy times, and that's I'm okay with that. So we might just do the SCP stuff. The gaming is designed to be raucous, ruder, more energetic, more active. That's fair. Yeah. So we'll go to SCP and maybe we'll click a random. Those stories are designed to be public domain. You are not allowed to basically what is it? The work is yours, but anyone can derive from it. Everyone can sort of read it. It is designed to be publicly accessible work. So yeah, there's seriously no problems borrowing from the SCP and entertaining online, with one caveat that we have to sort of accredit it, accredited, which is radically fair. So this is totally cool. We will do that. Absolutely. I'm all about accrediting people who deserve to be accredited. Accredited. I pronounce that better than I pronounce some of the words in the stories. So why don't we hop over? Boop. And maybe we could get started reading the realsies, even though it's only been like 14 minutes. Oh, that's okay. That's usual. That's not unusual. Let's see. My neck has been kind of kinky, and not in the fun way today. We had a rough sleep last night. I think, Valana, you had a rude awakening, and I had a rude awakening, and we just it was just not a good night last night. Tonight we must sleep better. Better. I am going to do. Let's lock that down. Just let me fuss a little bit. Here we go. Just fuss a little bit. Yeah, I could tell you woke up and you were kind of disturbed for quite a while after that. That did not sound like you were having fun. We carry on. Let's see. Chapter 17, The Thunder Child. Had the Martians aimed only at destruction, they might on Monday have annihilated the entire population of London, as it spread itself slowly through the home counties. Not only along the road through Barnet, but also through Edgware and Waltham Abbey, or Waltham, it's just Waltham probably, Abbey, and along the roads eastward to Southend and Shrewsburyness. Shrewsburyness? How do you make up a name like Shrewsburyness? There's a story behind there, I bet. And south of the Thames to Deal and Broadstairs poured the same frantic route. If one could have hung that June morning in a balloon in the blazing blue above London, every northward and eastward road running out of the tangled maze of streets would have seemed stippled black with the streaming fugitives, each dot a human agony of terror and physical distress. I have set forth at length in the last chapter my brother's account of the road through Chipping Barnet, in order that my readers may realize how that swarming of black dots appeared to one of those concerned. Never before in the history of the world had such a mass of human beings moved and suffered together. The legendary hosts of Goths and Huns, the hugest armies Asia has ever seen, would have been but a drop in that current. And this was no disciplined march. It was a stampede gigantic and terrible, without order and without a goal. 6 million people, unarmed and unprovisioned, driving headlong. It was the beginning of the rout of civilization, of the massacre of mankind. Directly below him, the balloonist would have seen the network of streets far and wide, houses, churches, squares, crescents, gardens, already derelict, spread out like a huge map, and in the south ward blotted. Over Ealing, Richmond, Wimbledon, it would have seemed as if some monstrous pen had flung ink upon the chart. Steadily, incessantly, each black splash grew and spread, shooting out ramifications this way and that, now banking itself against rising ground, now pouring swiftly over a crest into a newfound valley, exactly as a gout of ink would spread itself upon blotting paper. And beyond, over the blue hills that rise southward of the river, the glittering Martians went to and fro, calmly and methodically spreading their poison cloud over this patch of country and then over that, laying it again with their steam jets when it had served its when it had served its purpose, and taking possession of the conquered country. They do not seem to have aimed at extermination so much as at complete demoralization and the destruction of any opposition. They exploded any stores of powder they came upon, cut every telegraph, and wrecked the railways here and there. They were hamstringing mankind. They seemed in no hurry to extend the field of their operations, and did not come beyond the central part of London all that day. It is possible that a very considerable number of people in London stuck to their houses through Monday morning. Certain it is that many died at home, suffocated by the black smoke. Until about midday, the Pool of London was an astonishing scene. Steamboats and shipping of all sorts lay there, tempted by the enormous sums of money offered by fugitives, and it is said that many who swam out to these vessels were thrust off with boat-hooks and drowned. About 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the thinning remnant of a cloud of the black vapor appeared between the arches of Blackfriars Bridge. At that, the pool became a scene of mad confusion, fighting, and collision, and for some time a multitude of boats and barges jammed in the northern arch of the Tower Bridge and the sailors and lightermen had to fight savagely against the people who swarmed upon them from the riverfront. People were actually clambering down the piers of the bridge from above. When, an hour later, a Martian appeared beyond the clock tower and waded down the river, nothing but wreckage floated above Limehouse. Of the falling of the fifth cylinder I have presently to tell. The sixth star fell at Wimbledon. My brother my brother, keeping watch beside the women in the chase of a meadow, saw the green flash of it far beyond the hills. On Tuesday, the little party, still set upon getting across the sea, made its way through the swarming country towards Colchester. The news that the Martians were now in possession of the whole of London was confirmed. They had been seen at Highgate, and even, it was said, at Neasden, but they did not come into my brother's view until the morrow. That day, the scattered multitudes began to realize the urgent need of provisions. As they grew hungry, the rights of property ceased to be regarded. Farmers were out to defend their cattle sheds, granaries, and ripening fruit crops with arms in their hands. A number of people now, like my brother, had their faces eastward, and there were some desperate souls even going back towards London to get food. These were chiefly people from the northern suburbs, whose knowledge of the black smoke came by hearsay. He heard that about half the members of the government had gathered at Birmingham, and that enormous quantities of high explosives were being prepared to be used in automatic mines across the Midland countries. He was also told that the Midland Railway Company had replaced the desertations of the first day's panic, had resumed traffic, and was running northward trains from St. Albans to relieve the congestion of the home counties. There was also a placard in Chipping Ongar announcing that large stores of flour were available in northern towns, and that within 24 hours bread would be distributed among the starving people in the neighborhood. But this intelligence did not deter him from the plan of escape he had formed, and the three pressed eastward all day, and heard no more of the bread distribution than this promise. Nor, as a matter of fact, did anyone else hear more of it. That night fell the seventh star, falling upon Primrose Hill. It fell while Miss Elphinstone was watching, for she took that duty alternately with my brother. She saw it. On Wednesday, the three fugitives, they had passed the night in a field of unripe wheat, reached Chelmsford, and there a body of the inhabitants, calling itself the Committee of Public Supply, seized the pony as provisions, and would give nothing in exchange for it but the promise of a share in it the next day. Here there were rumors of Martians at Epping, and news of the destruction of Waltham Abbey powder mills in a vain attempt to blow up one of the invaders. People were watching for Martians here from the church towers. My brother, very luckily for him as it chanced, preferred to push on at once to the coast rather than wait for food, although all three of them were very hungry. By midday, they passed through Tillingham, which, strangely enough, seemed to be quite silent and deserted, save for a few furtive plunderers hunting for food. Near Tillingham, they suddenly came in sight of the sea, and the most amazing crowd of shipping of all sorts that it is possible to imagine. For after the sailors could no longer come up the Thames, they came on to the Essex coast, to Harwich and Walton and Clacton, and afterwards to Foulness and Showbury, to bring off the people. They lay in a huge sickle-shaped curve that vanished into the mist at last towards the Naze. Close inshore was a multitude of fishing smacks, English, Scotch, French, Dutch, and Swedish, steam launches from the Thames, yachts, electric boats, and beyond were ships of larger burden, a multitude of filthy colliers, trim merchantmen, cattle ships, passenger boats, petroleum tanks, ocean tramps, an old white transport even. Neat white and grey liners from Southampton and Hamburg, and along the blue coast across the Blackwater, my brother could make out dimly a dense swarm of boats, chaffering with the people on the beach. A swarm which also extended up the Blackwater almost to Malden. I swear to God, we are going to say every place name in England by the end of this book. About a couple of miles out lay an ironclad, very low in the water, almost to my brother's perception like a waterlogged ship. This was the ram Thunderchild. It was the only warship in sight, but far away to the right, over the smooth surface of the sea, for that day there was a dead calm, lay a serpent of black smoke to mark the next ironclads of the Channel Fleet, which hovered in an extended line, steam up and ready for action, across the Thames estuary during the course of the Martian conquest, vigilant and yet powerless to prevent it. At the sight of the sea, Mrs. Elphinstone, in spite of the assurances of her sister-in-law, gave way to panic. She had never been out of England before. She would rather die than trust herself friendless in a foreign country, and so forth. She seemed, poor woman, to imagine that the French and the Martians might prove very similar. She had been growing increasingly hysterical, fearful, and depressed during the 2 days' journeyings. Her great idea was to return to Stanmore. Things had always been well and safe at Stanmore. They would find George at Stanmore. Again, it was George. It was with the greatest difficulty that they could get her down to the beach, where presently my brother succeeded in attracting the attention of some men on a paddler steamer from the Thames. They sent a boat and drove a bargain for £36 for 3. The steamer was going, these men said, to Ostend. It was about 2 o'clock when my brother, having paid their fares at the gangway, found himself safely aboard the steamboat with his charges. There was food aboard, albeit at exorbitant prices, and the 3 of them contrived to eat a meal on one of the seats forward. There were already a couple of score of passengers aboard, some of whom had expended their last money in securing a passage, but the captain lay off the Blackwater until 5 in the afternoon, picking up passengers until the seated decks were even dangerously crowded. He would probably have remained longer had it not been for the sound of guns that began about that hour in the south. As if in answer, the ironclad seaward fired a small gun and hoisted a string of flags, a jet of smoke spraying out of her funnels. Some of the passengers were of opinion that this firing came from Shoeburyness, until it was noticed that it was growing louder. At the same time, far away in the southeast, the masts and upper works of 3 ironclads rose one after the other out of the sea, beneath clouds of black smoke. But my brother's attention speedily reverted to the distant firing in the south. He fancied he saw a column of smoke rising out of the distant grey haze. The little steamer was already flapping her way eastward of the big crescent of shipping, and the low Essex coast was growing blue and hazy when a Martian appeared, small and faint in the remote distance, advancing along the muddy coast from the direction of Foulness. At that, the captain on the bridge swore at the top of his voice with fear and anger at his own delay, and the paddles seemed infected with his terror. Every soul aboard stood at the bulwarks or on the seats of the steamer and stared at that distant shape, higher than the trees or church towers inland, and advancing with a leisurely parody of a human stride. It was the first Martian my brother had seen, and he stood more amazed than terrified, watching this Titan advancing deliberately towards the shipping, wading farther and farther into the water as the coast fell away. Then, far away beyond the crouch, came another, striding over some stunted trees, and then yet another still farther off, wading deeply through a shiny mudflat that seemed to hang halfway up between sea and sky. They were all stalking seaward, as if to intercept the escape of the multitudinous vessels that were crowded between Foulness and the Naze. In spite of the throbbing exertions of the engines of the little paddle boat and the pouring of foam from her wheels flung behind her, she receded with terrifying slowness from this ominous advance. Glancing northwestward, my brother saw the large crescent of shipping already writhing with the approaching terror. One ship passing behind another coming round from the broadside to end on. Steamships whistling, giving off volumes of steam, sails being let out, launches rushing hither and thither. He was so fascinated by this, and by the creeping danger away to the left, that he had no eyes for anything seaward. And then a swift movement of the steamboat, she had suddenly come round to avoid being run down, flung him headlong from the seat upon which he was standing. There was a shouting all about him, a trampling of feet, and a cheer that seemed to be answered faintly. The steamboat lurched and rolled him over on his hands. He sprang to his feet and saw to starboard, and not 100 yards from the heeling, pitching boat, a vast iron bulk like the blade of a plow tearing through the water, tossing it on either side in huge waves of foam that leaped towards the steamer, flinging her paddles helplessly in the air, and then sucking her deck down almost to the waterline. A douche of spray blinded my brother for a moment. When his eyes were clear again, he saw the monster had passed and was rushing landward. Big iron upper works rose out of the headlong structure, and from that twin funnels projected and spat a smoking blast shot with fire. It was the torpedo ram, Thunderchild, steaming headlong, coming to the rescue of the threatened shipping. Keeping his footing on the heaving deck by clutching the bulwarks, my brother looked past this charging leviathan at the Martians again, and he saw the three of them now close together, and standing so far out to sea that their tripod supports were almost entirely submerged. Thus sunken, and seen in remote perspective, they appeared far less formidable than the huge iron bulk in whose wake the steamer was pitching so helplessly. It would seem they were regarding this new antagonist with astonishment. To their intelligence, it may be, the giant was even such another as themselves. The Thunderchild fired no gun, but simply drove full speed towards them. It was probably her not firing that enabled her to get so near the enemy as she did. They did not know what to make of her. One shell, and they would have sent her to the bottom forthwith with the heat ray. She was steaming at such a pace that in a minute she seemed halfway between the steamboat and the Martians, a diminishing black bulk against the receding horizontal expanse of the Essex coast. Suddenly, the foremost Martian lowered his tube and discharged a canister of the black gas at the ironclad. It hit her larboard side and glanced off in an inky jet that rolled away to seaward, an unfolding torrent of black smoke, from which the ironclad drove clear. To the watchers from the steamer low in the water, and with the sun in their eyes, it seemed as though she were already among the Martians. They saw the gaunt figures separating and rising out of the water as they retreated shoreward, and one of them raised the camera-like generator of the heat ray. He held it pointed obliquely downward, and a bank of steam sprang from the water at its touch. It must have driven through the iron of the ship's side like a white-hot iron rod through paper. A flicker of flame went up through the rising steam, and then the Martian reeled and staggered. In another moment, he was cut down, and a great body of water and steam shot high in the air. The guns of the Thunderchild sounded through the reek, going off one after the other, and one shot splashed the water high close to the steamer, ricocheted towards the other flying ships to the north, and smashed a smack to matchwood. But no one heeded that very much. At the sight of the Martian's collapse, the captain on the bridge yelled inarticulately, and all the crowding passengers on the steamer's stern shouted together. And then they yelled again, for surging out beyond the white tumult drove something long and black, the flames streaming from its middle parts, its ventilators and funnels spouting fire. She was still alive. The steering gear, it seems, was intact and her engines working. She headed straight for the second Martian, and was within 100 yards of him when the heat ray came to bear. Then, with a violent thud, a blinding flash, her decks, her funnels leaped upwards. The Martian staggered with the violence of her explosion, and in another moment, the flaming wreckage, still driving forward with the impetus of its pace, had struck him and crumpled him up like a thing of cardboard. My brother shouted involuntarily. A boiling tumult of steam hid everything again. "Two!" yelled the captain. Everyone was shouting. The whole steamer from end to end rang with frantic cheering that was taken up first by one and then by all in the crowding multitude of ships and boats that was driving out to sea. The steam hung upon the water for many minutes, hiding the third Martian and the coast altogether, and all this time the boat was paddling steadily out to sea and away from the fight. And when at last the confusion cleared, the drifting bank of black vapor intervened, and nothing of the Thunder Child could be made out, nor could the third Martian be seen. But the ironclads to seaward were now quite close and standing in towards shore past the steamboat. The little vessel continued to beat its way seaward, and the ironclads receded slowly towards the coast, which was hidden still by a marbled bank of vapor, part steam, part black gas, eddying and combining in the strangest way. The fleet of refugees was scattering to the northeast. Several smacks were sailing between the ironclads and the steamboat. After a time, and before they reached the sinking cloud bank, the warships turned northward, and then abruptly went about and passed into the thickening haze of evening southward. The coast grew faint, and at last indistinguishable amid the low banks of clouds that were gathering about the sinking sun. It occurs to me that all that steam would probably precipitate all the black smoke, right? Because the black smoke gets sort of deactivated, if you will, because of the jets of hot water. So I wonder if that steam is good enough, or if there's like a kinetic element to that too. Then suddenly, out of the golden haze of the sunset, came the vibration of guns, and a form of black shadows moving. Everyone struggled to the rail of the steamer and peered into the blinding furnace of the west, but nothing was to be distinguished clearly. A mass of smoke rose slanting and barred the face of the sun. The steamboat throbbed on its way through interminable suspense. The sun sank into gray clouds. The sky flushed and darkened. The evening star trembled into sight. It was deep twilight when the captain cried out and pointed. My brother strained his eyes. Something rushed up into the sky out of the grayness, rushed slantingly upward and very swiftly into the luminous clearness above the clouds in the western sky. Something flat and broad and very large that swept round in a vast curve, grew smaller, sank slowly, and vanished again into the gray mystery of the night. And as it flew, it rained down darkness upon the land. Have they gained air superiority? That is the end of book 1. That would have been a great place to end last time, so I guess we have to end stream now. Right, is that how that works? Yeah, okay, bye all, yeah. Alana's leaving. Alright. Book 2, The Earth Under the Martians. Chapter 1, Underfoot. In the first book, I have wandered so much from my own adventures to tell the experiences of my brother that all through the last 2 chapters I and the curate have been lurking in the empty house at Halliford, whither we fled to escape the black smoke. There I will resume. We stopped there all Sunday night and all the next day. the day of the panic, in a little island of daylight, cut off by the black smoke from the rest of the world. We could do nothing but wait in aching inactivity during those 2 weary days. That's good. I don't want to cover the same amount of time again. My mind was occupied by anxiety for my wife. I figured her at Leatherhead, terrified, in danger, mourning me already as a dead man. I paced the rooms and cried aloud when I thought of how I was cut off from her, of all that might happen to her in my absence. My cousin, I knew, was brave enough for any emergency, but he was not the sort of man to realize danger quickly, to rise promptly. What was needed now was not bravery, but circumspection. My only consolation was to believe that the Martians were moving Londonward and away from her. Such vague anxieties keep the mind sensitive and painful. I grew very weary and irritable with the curate's perpetual ejaculations. I tired of the sight of his selfish despair. After some ineffectual remonstrance, I kept away from him, staying in a room, evidently a children's schoolroom, containing globes, forms, and copybooks. When he followed me thither, I went to a box room at the top of the house and, in order to be alone with my aching miseries, locked myself in. We were hopelessly hemmed in by the black smoke all that day and the morning of the next. There were signs of people in the next house on Sunday evening, a face at a window and moving lights, and later the slamming of a door, but I do not know who these people were, nor what became of them. We saw nothing of them the next day. The black smoke drifted slowly riverward all through Monday morning, creeping nearer and nearer to us, driving at last along the roadway outside the house that hid us. A Martian came across the fields about midday, laying the stuff with a jet of superheated steam that hissed against the walls, smashed all the windows it touched, and scalded the curate's hand as he fled out of the front room. When at last we crept across the sodden rooms and looked out again, the country northward was as though a black snowstorm had passed over it. Looking towards the river, we were astonished to see an unaccountable redness mingling with the black of the scorched meadows. For a time, we did not see how this change affected our position, save that we were relieved of our fear of the black smoke. But later I perceived that we were no longer hemmed in, and now we might get away. So soon as I realized that the way of escape was open, my dream of action returned, but the curate was lethargic, unreasonable. "We are safe here," he repeated. "Safe here." I resolved to leave him. Would that I had. Wiser now for the artilleryman's teaching, I sought out food and drink. I had found oil and rags for my burns, and I also took a hat and a flannel shirt that I found in one of the bedrooms. When it was clear to him that I meant to go alone, had reconciled myself to going alone, he suddenly roused himself to come. And all being quiet throughout the afternoon, we started about 5 o'clock, as I should judge, along the blackened road to Sunbury. In Sunbury, and at intervals along the road, were dead bodies lying in contorted attitudes, horses as well as men, overturned carts and luggage, all covered thickly with black dust. That pall of cindery powder made me think of what I had read of the destruction of Pompeii. We got to Hampton Court without misadventure, our minds full of strange and unfamiliar appearances, and at Hampton Court our eyes were relieved to find a patch of green that had escaped the suffocating drift. We went through Bushy Park, with its deer going to and fro under the chestnuts, and some men and women hurrying in the distance towards Hampton. And so we came to Twickenham. These were the first people we saw. Itchy arm. Way across the road, the woods beyond Ham and Petersham were still afire. Twickenham was uninjured by either heat ray or black smoke, and there were more people about here, though none could give us news. For the most part, they were like ourselves, taking advantage of a lull to shift their quarters. I have an impression that many of the houses here were still occupied by scared inhabitants, too frightened even for flight. Here, too, the evidence of a hasty rout was abundant along the road. I remember most vividly 3 smashed bicycles in a heap, pounded into the road by wheels of subsequent carts. We crossed Richmond Bridge about 8:30. We hurried across the exposed bridge, of course, but I noticed floating down the stream a number of red masses, some many feet across. I did not know what these were. There was no time for scrutiny, and I put a more horrible interpretation on them than they deserved. Here again, on the Surrey side, were black dust that had once been smoke and dead bodies, a heap near the approach to the station, but we had no glimpse of the Martians until we were some way towards Barnes. We saw, in the blackened distance, a group of 3 people running down a side street towards the river, but otherwise it seemed deserted. Up the hill, Richmond town was burning briskly. Outside the town of Richmond, there was no trace of the black smoke. Then, suddenly, as we approached Kew, came a number of people running, and the upper works of a Martian fighting machine loomed in sight over the housetops, not 100 yards away from us. We stood aghast at our danger, and had the Martian looked down, we must immediately have perished. We were so terrified that we dared not go on, but turned aside and hid in a shed in a garden. There the curate crouched, weeping silently and refusing to stir again. But my fixed idea of reaching Leatherhead would not let me rest, and in the twilight I ventured out again. I went through a shrubbery and along a passage beside a big house standing in its own grounds, and so emerged upon the road towards Kew. The curate I left in the shed, but he came hurrying after me. Can't get rid of the guy, eh? That second start was the most foolhardy thing I ever did, for it was manifest the Martians were about us. No sooner had the curate overtaken me than we saw either the fighting machine we had seen before or another, far away across the meadows in the direction of Kew Lodge. 4 or 5 little black figures hurried before it across the green gray of the field, and in a moment it was evident this Martian pursued them. In 3 strides he was among them, and they ran, radiating from his feet in all directions. He used no heat ray to destroy them, but picked them up one by one. Apparently he tossed them into the great metallic carrier which projected behind him, much as a workman's basket hangs over his shoulder. It was the first time I realized that the Martians might have any other purpose than destruction with defeated humanity. We stood for a moment petrified, then turned and fled through a gate behind us into a walled garden, fell into, rather than found, a fortunate ditch, and lay there, scarce daring to whisper to each other until the stars were out. I suppose it was nearly 11 o'clock before we gathered courage to start again, no longer venturing into the road, but sneaking along hedgerows and through plantations, and watching keenly through the darkness, he on the right and I on the left, for the Martians, who seemed to be all about us. In one place, we blundered upon a scorched and blackened area, now cooling and ashen, and a number of scattered dead bodies of men, burned horribly about the heads and trunks, but with their legs and boots mostly intact, and of dead horses, 50 feet perhaps, behind a line of 4 ripped guns and smashed gun carriages. Sheen, it seemed, had escaped destruction, but the place was silent and deserted. Here we happened on no dead, though the night was too dark for us to see into the side roads of the place. In Sheen, my companion suddenly complained of faintness and thirst, and we decided to try one of the houses. The first house we entered, after a little difficulty with the window, was a small, semi-detached villa. I found nothing eatable left in the place but some moldy cheese. There was, however, water to drink, and I took a hatchet, which promised to be useful in our next housebreaking. We then crossed to a place where the road turns towards Mortlake. Here, there stood a white house within a walled garden, and in the pantry of this domicile we found a store of food: 2 loaves of bread in a pan, an uncooked steak, and the half of a ham. I gave this catalogue so precisely because, as it happened, we were destined to subsist upon this store for the next fortnight. Bottled beer stood under a shelf, and there were 2 bags of haricot beans and some limp lettuces. This pantry opened into a kind of wash-up kitchen, and in this was firewood. There was also a cupboard, in which we found nearly a dozen of burgundy, tinned soups and salmon, and 2 tins of biscuits. We sat in the adjacent kitchen in the dark, for we dared not strike a light, and ate bread and ham, and drank beer out of the same bottle. The curate, who was still timorous and restless, was now, oddly enough, for pushing on, and I was urging him to keep up his strength by eating when the thing happened that was to imprison us. "It can't be midnight yet," I said, and then came a blinding glare of vivid green light. Everything in the kitchen leapt out, clearly visible in green and black, and vanished again. And then followed such a concussion as I have never heard before or since. So close on the heels of this as to seem instantaneous came a thud behind me. A clash of glass, a crash and rattle of falling masonry all about us, and the plaster of the ceiling came down upon us, smashing into a multitude of fragments upon our heads. I was knocked headlong across the floor against the oven handle and stunned. I was insensible for a long time, the curate told me, and when I came to, we were in darkness again, and he, with the face wet, as I found afterwards with blood from my cut forehead, was dabbing water over me. For some time I could not recollect what had happened. Then things came to me slowly. A bruise on my temple asserted itself. "Are you better?" asked the curate in a whisper. At last I answered him. I sat up. "Don't move," he said. "The floor is covered with smashed crockery from the dresser. You can't possibly move without making a noise, and I fancy they are outside." We both sat quite silent, so that we could scarcely hear each other breathing. Everything seemed deadly still, but once something near us, some plaster or broken brickwork, slid down with a rumbling sound. Outside, and very near, was an intermittent metallic rattle. "That," said the curate, when presently it happened again. "Yes," I said, "but what is it?" "A Martian," said the curate. I listened again. It was not the heat ray, I said. For a time I was inclined to think one of the great fighting machines had stumbled against the house, as I had seen one stumble against the tower of Shepperton Church. Our situation was so strange and incomprehensible that for 3 or 4 hours, until the dawn came, we scarcely moved. And then the light filtered in, not through the window, which remained black, but through a triangular aperture between a beam and a heap of broken bricks in the wall behind us. The interior of the kitchen we now saw grayly for the first time. We have ads happening soon. We're going to pause here until they are started and finished, as we always do, before we continue. Author alluded to, or the character alluded to, this being when they are captured. So I keep waiting for that to happen. I guess you'll have to wait to find out what occurs. Time I'm going to stand up, take a little break. I encourage everyone to get up, have a little snack or a beverage perhaps, stretch, and we'll see you when we get back. Yay, we're back. Clear my eyeball of eyeballness. Well, not eyeballness, but you know what I mean. Non-eyeball things must be removed from the eyeball. Ah, yes. They're in a collapsed house where they had found food, and there was a little bit of light filtering through now. The window had been burst in by a mass of garden mold, which flowed over the table upon which we had been sitting and lay about our feet. Outside, soil was banked high against the house. Really. At the top of the window frame, we could see an uprooted drain pipe. The floor was littered with smashed hardware. The end of the kitchen towards the house was broken into, and since the daylight shone in, there was evident the greater part of the house had collapsed. Contrasting vividly with this ruin was the neat dresser, stained in the fashion pale green, and with a number of copper and tin vessels below it. The wallpaper imitating blue and white tiles, and a couple of colored supplements fluttering from the walls above the kitchen range. As the dawn grew clearer, we saw through the gap in the wall the body of a Martian standing sentinel. I suppose over the still glowing cylinder. At the sight of that, we crawled as circumspectly as possible out of the twilight of the kitchen into the darkness of the scullery. Also, a new cylinder crashed. Cool. Abruptly, the right interpretation dawned upon my mind. The fifth cylinder, I whispered. The fifth shot from Mars has struck this house and buried us under the ruins. For a time, the curate was silent, and then he whispered, God have mercy upon us. I heard him presently whimpering to himself. Save for that sound, we lay quite still in the scullery. I, for my part, scarce dared breathe, and sat with my eyes fixed on the faint light of the kitchen door. I could just see the curate's face, a dim oval shape, and his collar and cuffs. Outside, there began a metallic hammering, then a violent hooting, and then again, after a quiet interval, a hissing, like the hissing of an engine. These noises, for the most part problematic, continued intermittently, and seemed, if anything, to increase in number as time wore on. Presently, a measured thudding and a vibration that made everything about us quiver, and the vessels in the pantry ring and shift, began and continued. Once the light was eclipsed and the ghostly kitchen doorway became absolutely dark. That's the end of the sentence. For many hours, we must have crouched there, silent and shivering until our tired attention failed. ... At last, I found myself awake and very hungry. I am inclined to believe that we must have spent the greater portion of a day before that awakening. My hunger was at a stride so insistent that it moved me to action. I told the curate I was going to seek food, and felt my way towards the pantry. He made me no answer. But so soon as I began eating, the faint noise I made stirred him up, and I heard him crawling after me. Chapter 2. What we saw from the ruined house. After eating, we crept back to the scullery, and there I must have dozed again, for when presently I looked round, I was alone. The thudding vibration continued with wearisome persistence. I whispered for the curate several times, and at last felt my way to the door of the kitchen. It was still daylight, and I perceived him across the room, lying against the triangular hole that looked out upon the Martians. His shoulders were hunched so that his head was hidden from me. I could hear a number of noises almost like those in an engine shed, and the place rocked with the beating thud. Through the aperture in the wall, I could see the top of a tree touched with gold and the warm blue of a tranquil evening sky. A tranquil evening sky. For a minute or so, I remained watching the curate, and then I advanced, crouching and stepping with extreme care amid the broken crockery that littered the floor. I touched the curate's leg, and he started so violently that a mass of plaster went sliding down outside and fell with a loud impact. I gripped his arm, fearing he might cry out, and for a long time we crouched motionless. I turned to see how much of our rampart remained. The detachment of the plaster had left a vertical slit open in the debris, and by rising myself cautiously across the beam, I was able to see out of this gap into what had been overnight a quiet suburban roadway. Vast indeed was the change that we beheld. The fifth cylinder must have fallen right into the midst of the house we had first visited. The building had vanished, completely smashed, pulverized, and dispersed by the blow. The cylinder lay now far beneath the original foundations, deep in a hole already vastly larger than the pit I had looked into at awaking. The earth all round it had splashed under that tremendous impact. Splashed is the only word, and lay in heaped piles that hid the masses of the adjacent houses. It had behaved exactly like mud under a violent blow of a hammer. Our house had collapsed backward. The front portion, even on the ground floor, had been destroyed completely. By a chance, the kitchen and scullery had escaped and stood buried now under soil and ruins, closed in by tons of earth on every side, save towards the cylinder. Over that aspect, we hung now on the very edge of the great circular pit the Martians were engaged in making. The heavy beating sound was evidently just behind us, and ever and again a bright green vapor drove up like a veil across our peephole. The cylinder was already opened in the center of the pit, and on the farther edge of the pit, amid the smashed and gravel-heaped shrubbery, one of the great fighting machines, deserted by its occupant, stood stiff and tall against the evening sky. At first, I scarcely noticed the pit and the cylinder, although it has been convenient to describe them first, on account of the extraordinary glittering mechanism I saw busy in the excavation, and on account of the strange creatures that were crawling slowly and painfully across the heaped mold near it. The mechanism it certainly was that held my attention first. It was one of those complicated fabrics that have since been called handling machines, and the study of which has already given such an enormous impetus to terrestrial invention. As it dawned upon me first, it presented a sort of metallic spider with 5 jointed, agile legs, and with an extraordinary number of jointed levers, bars, and reaching and clutching tentacles about its body. Most of its arms were retracted, but with 3 long tentacles it was fishing out a number of rods, plates, and bars which lined the covering and apparently strengthened the walls of the cylinder. These, as it extracted them, were lifted out and deposited upon a level surface of earth behind it. Its motion was so swift, complex, and perfect that at first I did not see it as a machine, in spite of its metallic glitter. The fighting machines were coordinated and animated to an extraordinary pitch, but nothing to compare with this. People who have never seen these structures and have only the ill-imagined efforts of artists or the imperfect descriptions of such eyewitnesses as myself to go upon scarcely realize that living quality. I recall particularly the illustration of one of the first pamphlets to give a consecutive account of the war. The artist had evidently made a hasty study of one of the fighting machines, and there his knowledge ended. He presented them as tilted, stiff tripods without either flexibility or subtlety, and with an altogether misleading monotony of effect. The pamphlet containing these renderings had a considerable vogue, and I mention them here simply to warn the reader against the impression they may have created. They were no more like the Martians I saw in action than a Dutch doll is a human being. To my mind, the pamphlet would have been much better without them. At first, I say, the handling machine did not impress me as a machine, but as a crab-like creature with a glittering integument. The controlling Martian, whose delicate tentacles actuated its movements, seemed to be simply the equivalent of the crab's cerebral portion. But then I perceived the resemblance of its gray-brown, shiny, leathery integument to that of the other sprawling bodies beyond. And the true nature of this dexterous workman dawned upon me. With that realization, my interest shifted to those other creatures, the real Martians. Already I had had a transient impression of these, and the first nausea no longer obscured my observation. Moreover, I was concealed and motionless, and under no urgency of action. They were, I now saw, the most unearthly creatures it is possible to conceive. They were huge, round bodies, or rather heads, about 4 feet in diameter, each body having in front of it a face. This face had no nostrils. Indeed, the Martians do not seem to have had any sense of smell, but it had a pair of very large, dark-colored eyes, and just beneath this a kind of fleshy beak. In the back of this head, or body, I scarcely know how to speak of it, was the single tight tympanic surface, since known to be anatomically an ear, though it must have been almost useless in our dense air. In a group round the mouth were 16 slender, almost whip-like tentacles, arranged in 2 bunches of 8 each. These bunches have since been named, rather aptly, by that distinguished anatomist, Professor Howes, the hands. Even as I saw these Martians for the first time, they seemed to be endeavoring to raise themselves on these hands, but of course, with the increased weight of terrestrial conditions, this was impossible. There is reason to suppose that on Mars they may have progressed upon them with some facility. The internal anatomy, I may remark here, as dissection has since shown, was almost equally simple. The greater part of the structure was the brain, sending enormous nerves to the eyes, ear, and tactile tentacles. Besides this were the bulky lungs, into which the mouth opened, and the heart and its vessels. The pulmonary distress caused by the denser atmosphere and greater gravitational attraction was only too evident in the convulsive movements of the outer skin. And this was the sum of the Martian organs. Strange as it may seem to a human being, all the complex apparatus of digestion, which makes up the bulk of our bodies, did not exist in the Martians. They were heads, merely heads. Entrails they had none. They did not eat, much less digest. Instead, they took the fresh, living blood of other creatures and injected it into their own veins. I have myself seen this been done, as I shall mention in its place. But squeamish as I may seem, I cannot bring myself to describe what I could not endure even to continue watching. Let it suffice to say, blood obtained from a still living animal, in most cases from a human being, was run directly by means of a little pipette into the recipient canal. They're vampires. The bare idea of this is no doubt horribly repulsive to us. But at the same time, I think that we should remember how repulsive our carnivorous habits would seem to an intelligent rabbit. Yeah, Martians are vampires. Yeah. I think Zephy would love it. The psychological advantages of the practice of injection are undeniable. If one thinks of the tremendous waste of human time and energy occasioned by eating and the digestive process, our bodies are half made up of glands and tubes and organs occupied in turning heterogeneous food into blood. The digestive processes and their reaction upon the nervous system sap our strength and color our minds. Men go happy or miserable as they have healthy or unhealthy livers or sound gastric glands. But the Martians were lifted above all these organic fluctuations of mood and emotion. Their undeniable preference for men as their source of nourishment is partly explained by the nature of the remains of the victims they had brought with them as provisions from Mars. These creatures, to judge from the shriveled remains that have fallen into human hands, were bipeds with flimsy, siliceous skeletons, almost like those of the siliceous sponges, and feeble musculature, standing about 6 feet high and having round, erect heads and large eyes in flinty sockets. 2 or 3 of these seemed to have been brought in each cylinder, and all were killed before Earth was reached. It was just as well for them, for the mere attempt to stand upright upon our planet would have broken every bone in their bodies. And while I am engaged in this description, I may add in this place certain further details which, although they were not all evident to us at the time, will enable the reader who is unacquainted with them to form a clearer picture of these offensive creatures. In 3 other points in their physiology differed strangely from ours. Their organisms did not sleep any more than the heart of man sleeps. Since they had no extensive muscular mechanism to recuperate, that periodical extinction was unknown to them. They had little or no sense of fatigue, it would seem. On Earth they could never have moved without effort, yet even to the last they kept in action. In 24 hours they did 24 hours of work, as even on Earth is perhaps the case with the ants. You know what? That's really interesting. We know better now that the brain sleeps for purposes other than resting our muscles. So I wonder if that lack of information is kind of why this sounds a little strange today. Yeah. There are like if dolphins put half their brain to sleep at a time, they could have gone with something like that. But I guess back then that kind of information was just not available. Sleep study and sleep science was very much considered a joke when I was younger. It's come a long way since then. So, fascinating subject. In the next place, wonderful as it seems in a sexual world, the Martians were absolutely without sex, and therefore without any of the tumultuous emotions that arise from the difference among men. That's not the whole picture either, but whatever, moving on. A young Martian there can be no dispute, was really born upon Earth during the war, and it was found attached to its parent, partially bundled off, just as young lilybuds bud off, or like the young animals in the freshwater polyp. So, kind of sex is that then? That's like they just grow off of their parents, and there's a name for that, right? They do budding. Isn't there there's a more like there's a better name than budding, right? Budding like the layman term, isn't it? There is something else. I think there's something else. In man, sorry, it's a kind of asexual clone. Yeah, that's the way to describe it. Yeah. In man, in all the higher terrestrial animals, such a method of increase has disappeared. But even on this earth, it was certainly the primitive method. I mean, that's an old viewpoint as well. Among the lower animals, up even to those first cousins of the vertebrated animals, the tunicates, the 2 processes occur side by side. But finally, the sexual method superseded its competitor altogether. They're not competitors, but whatever. On Mars, however, just the reverse has apparently been the case. It is worthy of remark that a certain speculative writer of quasi-scientific repute writing long before the Martian invasion, did forecast for man a final structure not unlike the actual Martian condition. His prophecy, I remember, appeared in November or December 1893 in a long-defunct publication, the Pall Mall Budget, and I recall a caricature of it in a pre-Martian periodical called Punch. He pointed out, writing in a foolish, facious tone. Facious? Yeah, we'll go with that. Writing in a foolish, facious tone. There's a better one. Ficatious. No, yeah, whatever. The perfection of mechanical appliances must ultimately supersede limbs. The perfection of chemical devices, digestion, that such organs as hair, external nose, teeth, ears, and chin were no longer essential parts of the human being, and that the tendency of natural selection would lie in the direction of their steady diminution through the coming ages. The brain alone remained a cardinal necessity. Only one other part of the body had a strong case for survival, and that was the hand, teacher and agent of the brain. While the rest of the body dwindled, the hands would grow larger. You can all just become psychic too. Do need hands at that point. There is many a true word written in jest, and here in the Martians we have beyond dispute the actual accomplishment of such a suppression of the animal side of the organism by the intelligence. To me, it is quite credible that the Martians may be descended from beings not unlike ourselves, by a gradual development of brain and hands, the latter giving rise to the two bunches of delicate tentacles at last, at the expense of the rest of the body. Without the body, the brain would, of course, become a mere selfish intelligence, without any of the emotional substratum of the human being. The last salient point in which the systems of these creatures differed from ours was in that one might have thought of a very trivial particular. Microorganisms, which cause so much disease and pain on Earth, have either never appeared upon Mars, or Martian sanitary science eliminated them ages ago. 100 diseases, all the fevers and contagions of human life, consumption, cancers, tumors, and such morbidities never enter the scheme of their life. And speaking of the differences between the life on Mars and terrestrial life, I may allude here to the curious suggestions of the red weed. I'll also suggest that microorganisms are incredibly important for us too. Hey, no shade on microorganisms in my channel, thank you. Apparently, the vegetable kingdom in Mars, instead of having green for a dominant color, is of a vivid blood red tint. At any rate, the seeds which the Martians intentionally or accidentally brought with them gave rise in all cases to red-colored growths. Only that known popularly as the red weed, however, gained any footing in competition with terrestrial forms. The red creeper was quite a transitory growth, and few people have seen it growing. For a time, however, the red weed grew with astonishing vigor and luxuriance. It spread up the sides of the pit by the third or fourth day of our imprisonment, and its cactus-like branches formed a carmine fringe to the edges of our triangular window. That's fast. And afterwards I found it broadcast throughout the country, and especially wherever there was a stream of water. The Martians had what appears to have been an auditory organ, a single round drum at the back of the head body, and eyes with a visual range not very different from ours, except that, according to Phillips, blue and violet were as black to them, and is commonly supposed that they communicated by sounds and tentacular gesticulations. This is asserted, for instance, in the able but hastily compiled pamphlet, written evidently by someone not an eyewitness of the Martian actions, to which I have already alluded, and which, so far, has been the chief source of information concerning them. Now, no surviving human being saw so much of the Martians in action as I did. I take no credit to myself for an accident, but the fact is so. And I assert that I watched them closely time after time, and that I have seen 4, 5, and once 6 of them sluggishly performing the most elaborately complicated operations together without either sound or gesture. Their peculiar hooting invariably preceded feeding. It had no modulation and was, I believe, in no sense a signal, but merely the expiration of air preparatory to the suctional operation. The suctional operation. I have a certain claim to at least an elementary knowledge of psychology, and in this matter I am convinced, as firmly as I am convinced of anything, that the Martians interchange thoughts without any physical intermediation. And I have been convinced of this in spite of strong preconceptions. Before the Martian invasion, as an occasional reader here or there may remember, I had written with some little vehemence against telepathic theory, or against the telepathic theory. The Martians wore no clothing. Their conceptions of ornament and decorum were necessarily different from ours, and not only were they evidently much less sensible of changes of temperature than we are, but changes of pressure do not seem to have affected their health at all seriously. Yet though they wore no clothing, it was in the other artificial additions to their bodily resources that their great superiority over man lay. We men, with our bicycles and road skates, our Lilienthal soaring machines, our guns and sticks and so forth, are just in the beginning of the evolution that the Martians have worked out. They have become practically mere brains, wearing different bodies according to their needs, just as men wear suits of clothing and take a bicycle in a hurry or an umbrella in the wet. And of their appliances, perhaps nothing is more wonderful to a man than the curious fact that what is the dominant feature of all human devices in mechanism is absent. The wheel is absent. Among all the things they brought to earth, there is no trace or suggestion of their use of wheels. One would have at least expected it in local motion. And in this connection, it is curious to remark that even on this earth, nature has never hit upon the wheel, or has preferred other expedients to its development. And not only did the Martians either not know of, which is incredible, or abstain from the wheel, but in their apparatus singularly little use is made of the fixed pivot or relatively fixed pivot, with circular motions thereabout confined to one plane. Almost all of the joints of the machinery Almost all of the joints of the machinery present a complicated system of sliding parts moving over small but beautifully curved friction bearings. And while upon this matter of detail it is remarkable that the long leverages of their machines are, in most cases, actuated by a sort of sham musculature of the discs in an elastic sheath, these discs become polarized and drawn closely and powerfully together when traversed by a current of electricity. In this way, the curious parallelism to animal motions, which was so striking and disturbing to the human beholder, was attained. Such quasi-muscles abound in the crab-like handling machine which, on my first peeping out of the slit, I watched unpacking the cylinder. It seemed infinitely more alive than the actual Martians lying beyond it in the sunset light, panting, stirring ineffectual tentacles and moving feebly after their vast journey across space. And I hiccuped. While I was still watching their sluggish motions in the sunlight and noting each strange detail of their form, the curate reminded me of his presence by pulling violently at my arm. I turned to a scowling face and silent, eloquent lips. He wanted the slit, which permitted only one of us to peep through, and so I had to forego watching them for a time while he enjoyed that privilege. When I looked again, the busy handling machine had already put together several of the pieces of apparatus it had taken out of the cylinder into a shape having an unmistakable likeness to its own. and down on the left, a busy little digging mechanism had come into view, emitting jets of green vapor and working its way round the pit, excavating and embanking in a methodical and discriminating manner. This it was which had caused the regular beating noise, and the rhythmic shocks that had kept our ruinous refuge quivering. It piped and whistled as it worked. So far as I could see, the thing was without a directing Martian at all. End of chapter 2. Chapter 3. The Days of Imprisonment. The arrival of a second fighting machine drove us from our peephole into the scullery, for we feared that from his elevation the Martian might see down upon us behind our barrier. At a later date, we began to feel less in danger of their eyes, for to an eye in the dazzle of the sunlight outside our refuge must have been blank blackness. But at first, the slightest suggestion of approach drove us into the scullery in a heart-throbbing retreat. Yet terrible as was the danger we incurred, the attraction of peeping was for both of us irresistible. And I recall now with a sort of wonder that in spite of the infinite danger in which we were between starvation and a still more terrible death, we could yet struggle bitterly for that horrible privilege of sight. We would race across the kitchen in a grotesque way between eagerness and the dread of making a noise, and strike each other and thrust and kick within a few inches of exposure. The fact is that we had absolutely incompatible dispositions and habits of thought and action, and our danger and isolation only accentuated the incompatibility. At Halliford, I had already come to hate the curate's trick of helpless exclamation, his stupid rigidity of mind. His endless muttering monologue vitiated every effort I made to think out a line of action, and drove me at times, thus pent up and intensified, almost to the verge of craziness. He was as lacking in restraint as a silly woman. Apologies to women. He would weep for hours together, and I verily believe that to the very end, this spoiled child of life thought his weak tears in some way efficacious. Effective. I'm going to go with effective. And I would sit in the darkness, unable to keep my mind off him by reason of his importunities. He ate more than I did, and it was in vain I pointed out that our only chance of life was to stop in the house until the Martians had done with their pit. That in that long patience a time might presently come when we should need food. He ate and drank impulsively, in heavy meals at long intervals. He slept little. As the days wore on, his utter carelessness of any consideration so intensified our distress and danger that I had, much as I loathed doing it, to resort to threats, and at last to blows. That brought him to reason for a time, but he was one of those weak creatures, void of pride, timorous, anemic, hateful souls, full of shifty cunning, who face neither God nor man, who face not even themselves. Oh, I know that type. They're disagreeable, yes. Oh, look at this. It is disagreeable for me to recall and write these things, but I set them down that my story may lack nothing. Those who have escaped the dark and terrible aspects of life will find my brutality, my flash of rage, and our final tragedy easy enough to blame, for they know what is wrong as well as any, but not what is possible to tortured men. But those who have been under the shadow, who have gone down at last to elemental things, will have a wider charity. While within we fought out our dark, dim contest of whispers, snatched food and drink, and gripping hands and blows without, in the pitiless sunlight of that terrible June, was the strange wonder, the unfamiliar routine of the Martians in the pit. Let me return to those first new experiences of mine. After a long time, I ventured back to the peephole, to find that the newcomers had been reinforced by the occupants of no fewer than 3 of the fighting machines. These last had brought with them certain fresh appliances that stood in an orderly manner about the cylinder. The second handling machine was now completed, and was busied in serving one of the novel contrivances the big machine had brought. This was a body resembling a milk can in its general form, above which oscillated a pear-shaped receptacle, and from which a stream of white powder flowed into a circular basin below. It's interesting, that little story about their fight and their conflict. They are right near possibly one of the most important discoveries or realizations that humanity, our species, could ever want to know or have. And the sort of like the danger, yeah, and yet the people are being people. They're in danger, huge danger, and yet they still behave in ways that are sort of like, to an outside person sitting in a basement, looking into a webcam, reading a book to people, wouldn't have like the experiences in order to empathize with. They are just acting like crazy fools, right? You know you're in danger, and you also know the thing happening just outside your door is the most fantastic thing that can happen to our species, and you're fighting over the food and water, or you eating too much of it, or like, I kind of with the author in this point, like that other guy reminds me of. I'm not gonna say it. I know a person who I believe acts like that. They're very selfish people, and and they have no concept of consequences beyond the next few moments of their life. It's frustrating to deal with those people. Their values are very different from yours, and long-term success doesn't seem to be one of them. And while within we fought out our dark... Have I read this part already? I think. Yeah, I have. Yeah, so the circular basin below, right? Making concrete or something. The oscillatory motion was imparted to this by one tentacle of the handling machine. With two spatulated hands, the handling machine was digging out and flinging masses of clay into the pear-shaped receptacle above, while with another arm it periodically opened a door and removed rusty and blackened clinkers from the middle part of the machine. Another steely tentacle directed the powder from the basin along a ribbed channel towards some receiver that was hidden from me by the mound of bluish dust. From this unseen receiver, a little thread of green smoke rose vertically into the quiet air. As I looked at the handling machine with a faint and musical clinking extended telescopic fashion, a tentacle that had been a moment before a mere blunt projection, until its end was hidden behind the mound of clay. In another second, it had lifted a bar of white aluminium into sight, untarnished as yet, and shining dazzlingly, and deposited it in a growing stack of bars that stood at the side of the pit. Between sunset and starlight, this dexterous machine must have made more than 100 such bars out of the crude clay, and the mound of bluish dust rose steadily until it topped the side of the pit. Aluminium from clay, huh? That's an alchemist's dream trick. The contrast between the swift and complex movements of these contrivances and the inert, panting clumsiness of their masters was acute, and for days I had to tell myself repeatedly that these latter were indeed the living of the two things. The curate had possession of the slit, and the first men were brought to the pit. I was sitting below, huddled up, listening with all my ears. He made a sudden movement backward, and I, fearful that we were observed, crouched in a spasm of terror. He came sliding down the rubbish and crept beside me in the darkness, inarticulate, gesticulating, and for a moment I shared his panic. His gesture suggested a resignation of the slit, and after a little while my curiosity gave me courage, and I rose up, stepped across him, and clambered up to it. At first, I could see no reason for his frantic behavior. The twilight had now come, the stars were little and faint, but the pit was illuminated by the flickering green fire that came from the aluminium making. The whole picture was a flickering scheme of green gleams and shifting rusty black shadows, strangely trying to the eyes. Over and through it all went the bats, heeding it not at all. The sprawling Martians were no longer to be seen. The mound of blue-green powder had risen to cover them from sight, and a fighting machine, with its legs contracted, crumpled, and abbreviated, stood across the corner of the pit. And then, amid the clangor of machinery, came a drifting suspicion of human voices that I entertained at first, only to dismiss. I crouched, watching this fighting machine closely, satisfying myself now for the first time that the hood did indeed contain a Martian. As the green flames lifted, I could see the oily gleam of his integument and the brightness of his eyes. And suddenly I heard a yell, and saw a long tentacle reaching over the shoulder of the machine to the little cage that hunched upon its back. Then something struggling violently, was lifted high against the sky, a black, vague enigma against the starlight, and as this black object came down again, I saw by the green brightness that it was a man. For an instant he was clearly visible. He was a stout, ruddy, middle-aged man, well-dressed. 3 days before he must have been walking the world, a man of considerable consequence. I could see his staring eyes and gleams of light on his studs and watch chain. He vanished behind the mound, and for a moment there was silence, and then began a shrieking and a sustained and cheerful hooting from the Martians. I slid down the rubbish, struggled to my feet, clapped my hands over my ears, and bolted into the scullery. The curate, who had been crouching silently with his arms over his head, looked up as I passed, cried out quite loudly at my desertion of him, and came running after me. Yeah, that's what you want. You want to be loud. Yes. Confuse the Martians. Yes. That night, as we lurked in the scullery, balanced between our horror and the terrible fascination this peeping had, although I felt an urgent need of action, I tried in vain to conceive some plan of escape, but afterwards, during the second day, I was able to consider our position with great clearness. The curate, I found, was quite incapable of discussion. This new and culminating atrocity had robbed him of all vestiges of reason or forethought. Practically, he had already sunk to the level of an animal. But as the saying goes, I gripped myself with both hands. It grew upon my mind, once I could face the facts, that terrible as our position was, there was as yet no justification for absolute despair. Our chief chance lay in the possibility of the Martians making the pit nothing more than a temporary encampment. Or even if they kept it permanently, they might not consider it necessary to guard it, and a chance of escape might be afforded us. I also weighed very carefully the possibility of our digging a way out in a direction away from the pit, but the chances of our emerging within sight of some sentinel fighting machine seemed at first too great, and I should have had to do all the digging myself. The curate would certainly have failed me. It was on the third day, if my memory serves me right, that I saw the lad killed. It was the only occasion on which I actually saw the Martians feed. After that experience, I avoided the hole in the wall for the better part of a day. I went into the scullery, removed the door, and spent some hours digging with my hatchet as silently as possible. But when I had made a hole about a couple of feet deep, the loose earth collapsed noisily, and I did not dare continue. I lost heart, and lay down on the scullery floor for a long time, having no spirit even to move. And after that, I abandoned altogether the idea of escaping by excavation. It says much for the impression the Martians had made upon me that at first I entertained little or no hope of our escape being brought about by the overthrow of any human effort. But on the fourth or fifth night I heard a sound like heavy guns. It was very late in the night, and the moon was shining brightly. The Martians had taken away the excavating machine, and, save for a fighting machine that stood in the remoter bank of the pit, and a handling machine that was buried out of my sight in a corner of the pit immediately beneath my peephole, the place was deserted by them. Except for the pale glow from the handling machine and the bars and patches of white moonlight, the pit was in darkness, and except for the clinking of the handling machine, quite still. That night was a beautiful serenity. Save for one planet, the moon seemed to have the sky to herself. I heard a dog howling, and that familiar sound it was that made me listen. Then I heard quite distinctly a booming exactly like the sound of great guns. 6 distinct reports I counted, and after a long interval, 6 again, and that was all. Chapter 4. The Death of the Curate. In a certain morbid sense, the cure for the curate. Whatever am I? It was on the 6th day of our imprisonment that I peeped for the last time, and presently found myself alone. Instead of keeping close to me and trying to oust me from the slit, the curate had gone back into the scullery. I was struck by a sudden thought. I went back quickly and quietly into the scullery. In the darkness, I heard the curate drinking. I snatched in the darkness, and my fingers caught a bottle of a burgundy. For a few minutes there was a tussle. The bottle struck the floor and broke, and I desisted and rose. We stood panting and threatening each other. In the end, I planted myself between him and the food, and told him of my determination to begin a discipline. I divided the food in the pantry into rations to last us 10 days. I would not let him eat any more that day. In the afternoon, he made a feeble effort to get at the food. I had been dozing, but in an instant I was awake. All day and all night we sat face to face, I weary but resolute, and he weeping and complaining of his immediate hunger. It was, I know, a night and a day, but to me it seems now, an interminable length of time. So, our widened incompatibility ended at last in open conflict. For 2 vast days we struggled in undertones and wrestling contests. There were times when I beat and kicked him madly, times when I cajoled and persuaded him, and once I tried to bribe him with the last bottle of burgundy, for there was a rainwater pump from which I could get water. But neither force nor kindness availed. He was indeed beyond reason. He would neither desist from his attacks on the food nor from his noisy babbling to himself. The rudimentary precautions to keep our imprisonment endurable he would not observe. Slowly I began to realize the complete overthrow of his intelligence, to perceive that my sole companion in this close and sickly darkness was a man insane. From certain vague memories, I am inclined to think my own mind wandered at times. I had strange and hideous dreams whenever I slept. It sounds paradoxical, but I am inclined to think that the weakness and insanity of the curate warned me, braced me, and kept me a sane man. On the 8th day he began to talk aloud instead of whispering, and nothing I could do would moderate his speech. It is just, O God, he would say, over and over again. It is just. On me and mine be the punishment laid. We have sinned, we have fallen short. There was poverty, sorrow, the poor were trodden in the dust, and I held my peace. I preached acceptable folly. My God, what folly, when I should have stood up, though I died for it, and called upon them to repent. Repent! Oppressors of the poor and needy, the winepress of God. God, he could put words together when he wants to. Then he would suddenly revert to the matter of food. I withheld from him, praying, begging, weeping, at last threatening. He began to raise his voice. I prayed him not to. He perceived a hold on me. He threatened he would shout and bring the Martians upon us. For a time that scared me, but any concession would have shortened our chance of escape beyond estimating. I defied him, although I felt no assurance that he might not do this thing. But that day, at any rate, he did not. He talked with his voice rising slowly through the greater part of the 8th and 9th days, threats, entreaties, mingled with a torrent of half-sane and always frothy repentance for his vacant sham of God's surface, such as made me pity him. Then he slept a while, and began again with renewed strength, so loudly that I must needs make him desist. Be still, I implored. He rose to his knees, for he had been sitting in the darkness near the copper. I have been still too long, he said, in a tone that must have reached the pit, and now I must bear my witness. Woe unto this unfaithful city! Woe, 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 woe! To the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet. Shut up, I said, rising to my feet, and in a terror lest the Martians should hear us. For God's sake! Nay, shouted the curate, at the top of his voice, standing likewise and extending his arms. Speak, the word of the Lord is upon me. In 3 strides he was at the door leading into the kitchen. I must bear witness. I go. It has already been too long delayed. I put out my hand and felt the meat chopper hanging to the wall. In a flash I was after him. I was fierce with fear. Before he was halfway across the kitchen, I had overtaken him. With one last touch of humanity, I turned back the blade and struck him with the butt. He went headlong forward and lay stretched out on the ground. I stumbled over him and stood panting. He lay still. Suddenly I heard a noise without. The run and smash of slipping plaster, and the triangular aperture in the wall was darkened. I looked up and saw the lower surface of a handling machine coming slowly across the hole. One of its gripping limbs curled amid the debris. Another limb appeared, feeling its way over the fallen beams. I stood petrified, staring. Then I saw a sort of glass plate near the edge of the body of the face, as we might call it, and the large, dark eyes of a Martian peering, and then a long metallic snake of tentacle came feeling slowly through the hole. I turned by an effort, stumbled over the curate, and stopped at the scullery door. The tentacle was now some way, 2 yards or more, in the room, and twisting and turning, with queer sudden movements this way and that. For a while I stood fascinated by that slow, fitful advance. Then, with a faint, hoarse cry, I forced myself across the scullery. I trembled violently. I could scarcely stand upright. I opened the door of the coal cellar and stood there in the darkness, staring at the faintly lit doorway into the kitchen and listening. Had the Martian seen me? What was it doing now? Something was moving to and fro there, very quietly. Every now and then it tapped against the wall, or started on its movements with a faint metallic ringing, like the movements of keys on a split ring. Then a heavy body, I knew too well what, was dragged across the floor of the kitchen towards the opening. Irresistibly attracted, I crept to the door and peeped into the kitchen. In the triangle of bright outer sunlight, I saw the Martian, in its briarius of a hanging bit of a handling machine, scrutinizing the curate's head. I thought at once it would infer my presence from the mark of the blow I had given him. I crept back to the coal cellar, shut the door, and began to cover myself up as much as I could, and as noiselessly as possible, in the darkness, among the firewood and coal therein. Every now and then I paused, rigid, to hear if the Martian had thrust its tentacles through the opening again. Then the faint metallic jingle returned. I traced it slowly, feeling over the kitchen. Presently I heard it near in the scullery, as I judged. I thought that its length might be insufficient to reach me. I prayed copiously. It passed, scraping faintly across the cellar door. An age of almost intolerable suspense intervened, and I heard it fumbling at the latch. It had found the door. The Martians understood doors. It worried at the catch for a minute, perhaps, and the door opened. In the darkness, I could just see the thing, like an elephant's trunk, more than anything else, waving towards me and touching and examining the wall, coals, wood and ceiling. It was like a black worm swaying its blind head to and fro. Once even it touched the heel of my boot. I was on the verge of screaming. I bit my hand. For a time the tentacle was silent. I could have fancied it had been withdrawn. Presently, with an abrupt click, it gripped something. I thought it had me, and seemed to go out of the cellar again. For a minute I was not sure. Apparently, it had taken a lump of coal to examine. I seized the opportunity of slightly shifting my position, which had become cramped, and then listened. I whispered in passionate prayers for safety. And we're going to pause there for ads that are about to happen. Be back soon. Bello has just shifted his position slightly as he had become cramped whilst hiding from the tentacle, listening, whispering passionately for prayers. For safety, sir. Then I heard the slow, deliberate sound creeping towards me again. Slowly it drew near, scratching against the walls and tapping the furniture. While I was still doubtful, it rapped smartly against the cellar door and closed it. I heard it go into the pantry, and the biscuit tins rattled and a bottle smashed, and then came a heavy bump against the cellar door, then silence that passed into an infinity of suspense. And gone? At last, I decided that it had. It came into the scullery no more, but I lay there all the 10th day in the close darkness, buried among coals and firewood, not daring even to crawl out for the drink for which I craved. It was the 11th day before I ventured so far from my security. Chapter 5. The Stillness. My first act, before I went into the scullery, was to fasten the door between the kitchen and the scullery. But the pantry was empty. Every scrap of food had gone. Apparently the Martian had taken it all on the previous day. At that discovery I despaired for the first time. I took no food, or no drink either, on the 11th or the 12th day. God, I would have a massive migraine at that point. At first my mouth and throat were parched, and my strength ebbed sensibly. I sat about in the darkness of the scullery, in a state of despondent wretchedness. My mind ran on eating. I thought I had become deaf, for the noises of movement I had been accustomed to hear from the pit had ceased absolutely. I did not feel strong enough to crawl noiselessly to the peephole, or I would have gone there. On the 12th day my throat was so painful that, taking the chance of alarming the Martians, I attacked the creaking rainwater pump that stood by the sink and got a couple of glassfuls of blackened and tainted rainwater. I was greatly refreshed by this, and emboldened by the fact that no inquiring tentacle followed the noise of my pumping. Not that he would have been inclined to wait, but look, you can just let that sit and the particulates will settle. During these days, in a rambling, inconclusive way, I thought much of the curate and of the manner of his death. On the 13th day, I drank some more water and dozed and thought disjointedly of eating and of vague, impossible plans of escape. Whenever I dozed, I dreamt of horrible phantasms, of the death of the curate, or the sumptuous dinners, but asleep or awake, I felt the keen pain that urged me to drink again and again. The light that came into the scullery was no longer grey, but red. To my disordered imagination, this seemed the color of blood. On the 14th day, I went into the kitchen, and I was surprised to find that the fronds of the red weed had grown right across the hole in the wall, turning the half-light of the place into a crimson-colored obscurity. It was early on the 15th day that I heard a curious, familiar sequence of sounds in the kitchen, and listening, identified it as the snuffing and scratching of a dog. Going into the kitchen, I saw a dog's nose peering in through a break among the ruddy fronds. This greatly surprised me. At the scent of me, he barked shortly. I thought if I could induce him to come into the place quietly, I should be able, perhaps, to kill and eat him, and in any case, it would be advisable to kill him, lest his actions attracted the attention of the Martians. Poor doggo. I crept forward, saying, "Good dog," very softly, but he suddenly withdrew his head and disappeared. I listened. I was not deaf, but certainly the pit was still. I heard a sound like the flutter of a bird's wings and a horse croaking, but that was all. For a long while I lay close to the peephole, but not daring to move aside the red plants that obscured it. Once or twice I heard a faint pitter-patter, like the feet of the dog going hither and thither on the sand far below me, and there were more bird-like sounds, but that was all. At length, encouraged by the silence, I looked out. Except in the corner where a multitude of crows hopped and fought over the skeletons of the dead the Martians had consumed, there was not a living thing in the pit. I stared about me, scarcely believing my eyes. All the machinery had gone, save for the big mound of grayish-blue powder in one corner, certain bars of aluminium in another, the blackbirds and the skeletons of the killed. The place was merely an empty circular pit in the sand. I slowly thrust myself out through the red weed and stood upon the mound of rubble. I could see in any direction save behind me, to the north, and neither the Martians nor sign of Martians were to be seen. They were all an illusion. The pit dropped sheerly from my feet, but a little way along the rubbish afforded a practical slope to the summit of the ruins. My chance of escape had come. I began to tremble. I hesitated for some time, and then, in a gust of desperate resolution, and with a heart that throbbed violently, I scrambled to the top of the mound in which I had been buried so long. I looked about again. To the northward, too, no Martian was visible. When I had last seen this part of Sheen in the daylight, it had been a straggling street of comfortable white and red houses, interspersed with abundant shady trees. Now I stood on a mound of smashed brickwork, clay and gravel, over which spread a multitude of red cactus-shaped plants, knee-high, without a solitary terrestrial growth to dispute their footing. The trees near me were dead and brown, but further a network of red threads scaled the still-living stems. The neighboring houses had all been wrecked, but none had been burned. Their walls stood, sometimes to the second story, with smashed windows and shattered doors. The red weed grew tumultuously in their roofless brooms. Below me was the great pit, with the crows struggling for its refuse. A number of other birds hopped about among the ruins. Far away I saw a gaunt cat slink crouchingly along a wall, but traces of men there were none. The day seemed, by contrast with my recent confinement, dazzlingly bright. The sky a glowing blue. A gentle breeze crept the red weed that covered every scrap of unoccupied ground, gently swaying, and oh, The sweetness of the air. Of the air. Chapter 6. The Work of 15 Days. For some time I stood tottering on the mound regardless of my safety. Within that noisome den from which I had emerged, I had thought with a narrow intensity only of our immediate security. I had not realized what had been happening to the world, had not anticipated this startling vision of unfamiliar things. I had expected to see sheen and ruins. I found about me the landscape, weird and lurid of another planet. For the moment I touched an emotion beyond the common range of men, yet one that the poor brutes we dominate know only too well. I felt as a rabbit might feel returning to his burrow and suddenly confronted by the work of a dozen busy navvies digging the foundations of a house. I felt the first inkling of a thing that presently grew quite clear in my mind, that oppressed me for many days, a sense of dethronement, a persuasion that I was no longer a master, but an animal among the animals under the Martian heel. With us it would be as with them, to lurk and watch, to run and hide. The fear and empire of man had passed away. But so soon as this strangeness had been realized, it passed, and my dominant motive became the hunger of my long and dismal fast. In the direction away from the pit, I saw, beyond a red-covered wall, a patch of garden ground unburied. This gave me a hint, and I went knee-deep, and sometimes neck-deep, in the red weed. The density of the weed gave me a reassuring sense of hiding. The wall was some 6 feet high, and when I attempted to clamber it, I found I could not lift my feet to the chest. So I went along by the side of it, and came to a corner and a rockwork that enabled me to get to the top and tumble into the garden I coveted. Here I found some young onions, a couple of gladiolus bulbs, and a quantity of immature carrots, all of which I secured, and, scrambling over a ruined wall, went on my way through scarlet and crimson trees towards Q. It was like walking through an avenue of gigantic blood drops, possessed with two ideas: to get more food, and to limp, as soon and as far as my strength permitted, out of this accursed, unearthly region of the pit. Some way farther, in a grassy place, was a group of mushrooms which I also devoured. And then I came upon a brown sheet of flowing shallow water where meadows used to be. These fragments of nourishment served only to whet my hunger. At first I was surprised at this food in a hot, dry summer, but afterwards I discovered that it was caused by the tropical exuberance of the red weed. Directly this extraordinary growth encountered water, it straightway became gigantic and of unparalleled fecundity. I think a kitty cat has used the litter pot and is turning by itself now. I suspect. Or it's the furnace. Could be the furnace. No, it's the pump. It's the new pump. We have a new pump for a new condensation pump. Yeah, that's what it is. It's so weird to hear it. Sorry. No furnace pump. No, it is a furnace pump, yeah. Its seeds were simply poured down into the water of the Wey and Thames, and its swiftly growing and titanic water fronds speedily choked both of those rivers. At Putney, as I afterwards saw, the bridge was almost lost in a tangle of this weed, and at Richmond too the Thames water poured in a broad and shallow stream across the meadows of Hampton and Twickenham. As the water spread, the weed followed them until the ruined villas of the Thames Valley were for a time lost in this red swamp, whose margin I explored, and much of the desolation the Martians had caused was concealed. In the end, the red weed succumbed almost as quickly as it had spread, a cankering disease due, it is believed, to the action of certain bacteria presently seized upon it. Now, by the action of natural selection, all terrestrial plants have acquired a resisting power against bacterial diseases. They never succumb without a severe struggle, but the red weed rotted like a thing already dead. The fronds became bleached and shriveled and brittle. They broke off at the least touch, and the waters that had stimulated their early growth carried their last vestiges out to sea. My first act on coming to this water was, of course, to slake my thirst. I drank a great deal of it and, moved by an impulse, gnawed some of the fronds of red weed, but they were watery and had a sickly metallic taste. I found the water was sufficiently shallow for me to wade securely, although the red weed impeded my feet a little. But the flood evidently got deeper towards the river, and I turned back to Mortlake. I managed to make out the road by means of occasional ruins of its villas and fences and lamps, and so presently I got out of this spate and made my way to the hill going up towards Roehampton, and came out on Putney Common. Here the scenery changed from the strange and unfamiliar to the wreckage of the familiar. Patches of ground exhibited the devastation of a cyclone, and in a few score yards I would come upon perfectly undisturbed spaces, houses with their blinds trimly drawn and doors closed as if they had been left for a day by the owners, or as if their inhabitants slept within. The red weed was less abundant. The tall trees along the lane were free from the red creeper. I hunted for food among the trees, finding nothing, and I also raided a couple of silent houses, but they had already been broken into and ransacked. I rested for the remainder of the daylight in a shrubbery, being, in my enfeebled condition, too fatigued to push on. All this time, I saw no human beings and no signs of the Martians. I encountered a couple of hungry-looking dogs, but both hurried circuitously away from the advances I made them. Near Roehampton, I had seen 2 human skeletons, not bodies, but skeletons, picked clean, and in the wood by me I found the crushed and scattered bones of several cats and rabbits and the skull of a sheep. But though I gnawed parts of these in my mouth, there was nothing to be got from them. After sunset, I struggled on along the road towards Putney, where I think the heat ray must have been used for some reason, and in the garden beyond Roehampton I got a quantity of immature potatoes, sufficient to stay my hunger. From this garden, one looked down upon Putney and the river. The aspect of the place in the dusk was singularly desolate. Blackened trees, blackened, desolate ruins, and down the hill the sheets of the flooded river, red tinged with the weed, and all over, silence. It filled me with indescribable terror to think how swiftly that desolating change had come. For a time, I believed that mankind had been swept out of existence, and that I stood there alone, the last man alive. Hard by the top of Putney Hill, I came upon another skeleton, with the arms dislocated and removed several yards from the rest of the body. As I proceeded, I became more and more convinced that the extermination of mankind was, save for such stragglers as myself, already accomplished in this part of the world. The Martians, I thought, had gone on and left the country desolated, seeking food elsewhere. Perhaps even now they were destroying Berlin or Paris, or it might be they had gone northward. How much further have we got to go? That was the end of chapter 6. We're looking at chapter 7, book 2. We have an hour. We're probably going to finish. Let's just finish. We have 4 chapters to go. Yeah. Chapter 7. The Man on Putney Hill. I spent that night in the inn that stands at the top of Putney Hill, sleeping in a made bed for the first time since my flight to Leatherhead. I will not tell the needless trouble I had breaking into that house. Afterwards, I found the front door was on the latch. nor how I ransacked every room for food until just on the verge of despair, in what seemed to me to be a servant's bedroom, I found a rat-gnawed crust and 2 tins of pineapple. The place had been already searched and emptied. In the bar, I afterwards found some biscuits and sandwiches that had been overlooked. The latter I could not eat, they were too rotten. But the former not only stayed my hunger, but filled my pockets. I lit no lamps, fearing some Martian might come beating that part of London for food in the night. Before I went to bed, I had an interval of restlessness, and prowled from window to window, peering out for some sign of these monsters. I slept little. As I lay in bed, I found myself thinking consecutively, a thing I do not remember to have done since my last argument with the curate. During all the intervening time, my mental condition had been a hurrying succession of vague emotional states or a sort of stupid receptivity. But in the night, my brain, reinforced, I suppose, by the food I had eaten, grew clear again, and I thought. 3 things struggled for possession of my mind: the killing of the curate, the whereabouts of the Martians, and the possible fate of my wife. The former gave me no sensation of horror or remorse to recall. I saw it simply as a thing done, a memory infinitely disagreeable, but quite without the quality of remorse. I saw myself then as I see myself now, driven step by step towards that hasty blow, the creature of a sequence of accidents leading inevitably to that. I felt no condemnation, yet the memory, static, unprogressive, haunted me. In the silence of the night, with the sense of the nearness of God that sometimes comes into the stillness and the darkness, I stood my trial, my only trial, for that moment of wrath and fear. I retraced every step of our conversation from the moment when I had found him crouching beside me, heedless of my thirst, and pointing to the fire and smoke that streamed up from the ruins of a Weybridge. We had been incapable of cooperation. Grim chance had taken no heed of that. I had foreseen. I should have left him at Halliford, but I did not foresee, and crime is to foresee and do. And I set this down, as I have set all this down, as I have set all this story down, as it was. There were no witnesses. All these things I might have concealed, but I set it down, and the reader must form his judgment as he will. And when, by an effort, I had set aside that picture of a prostrate body, I faced the problem of the Martians and the fate of my wife. For the former I had no data. I could imagine 100 things, and so unhappily I could for the latter. And suddenly that night became terrible. I found myself sitting up in bed, staring at the dark. I found myself praying that the heat ray might have suddenly and painlessly struck her out of being. Since the night of my return from Netherhead, I had not prayed. I had uttered prayers, fetish prayers. I had prayed as heathens mutter charms when I was in extremity. But now I prayed indeed, pleading steadfastly and sanely, face to face with the darkness of God. Strange night. Strangest in this, that so soon as dawn had come, I, who had talked with God, crept out of the house like a rat leaving its hiding place. A creature scarcely larger and inferior. A creature scarcely larger, an inferior animal, a thing that for any passing whim of our masters might be hunted and killed. Perhaps they also prayed confidently to God. Surely, if we have learned nothing else, this war has taught us pity, pity for those witless souls that suffer our domination. Morning was bright and fine, and the eastern sky glowed pink and was fretted with little golden clouds in the road that runs from the top of Putney Hill to Wimbledon, as a number of poor vestiges of the panicked torrent that must have poured Londonward on the Sunday night after the fighting began. There was a little 2-wheeled cart inscribed with the name of Thomas Lobb, greengrocer, New Malden, with a smashed wheel and an abandoned tin trunk. There was a straw hat trampled trampled into the now hardened mud, and at the top of West Hill, a lot of blood-stained glass about the overturned water trough. My movements were languid. My plans of the Vanguest, I had an idea of. Sorry, my plans of the vaguest. I'm going to say the vaguest. I had an idea of going to Leatherhead, though I knew that there I had the poorest chance of finding my wife. Certainly, unless death had overtaken them suddenly, my cousins and she would have fled thence. But it seemed to me I might find or learn there whither the Surrey people had fled. I knew I wanted to find my wife, that my heart ached for her and the world of men, but I had no clear idea how the finding might be done. I was also sharply aware now of my intense loneliness. From the corner I went under cover of a thicket of trees and bushes to the edge of Wimbledon Common, stretching wide and far. That dark expanse was lit in patches by yellow gorse and broom. There was no red weed to be seen, and as I prowled, hesitating on the verge of the open, the sun rose, flooding it all with light and vitality. I came upon a busy swarm of little frogs in a swampy place among the trees. I stopped to look at them, drawing a lesson from their stout resolve to live, and presently turning suddenly, with an odd feeling of being watched, I beheld something crouching amid a clump of bushes. I stood regarding this. I made a step towards it, and it rose up and became a man armed with a cutlass. I approached him slowly. He stood silent and motionless, regarding me. As I drew near, I perceived he was dressed in clothes as dusty and filthy as my own. He looked, indeed, as though he had been dragged through a culvert. Nearer, I distinguished the green slime of ditches mixed with the pale drab of dried clay in shiny, coaly patches. His black hair fell over his eyes, and his face was dark and dirty and sunken, so that at first I did not recognize him. There was a red cut across the lower part of his face. "Stop!" he cried. And I was within 10 yards of him, and I stopped. His voice was hoarse. "Where do you come from?" he said. I thought, surveying him. "I come from Mortlake," I said. "I was buried near the pit the Martians made about their cylinder. I have worked my way out and escaped." "There is no food about here," he said. "This is my country. All this hill down to the river and back to the Clapham, and up to the edge of the common. There is only food for one. Which way are you going?" I answered slowly. "I don't know," I said. "I have been buried in the ruins of a house 13 or 14 days. I don't know what has happened." He looked at me doubtfully, then started, and looked with a changed expression. "I have no wish to stop about here," said I. "I think I shall go to Leatherhead, for my wife was there." He shot out a pointing finger. "It is you," said he, "the man from Woking, and you weren't killed at Weybridge?" I recognized him at that same moment. "You are the artilleryman who came into my garden." "Good luck," he said. "We are lucky ones, fancy you." He put out a hand and I took it. I crawled up a drain. He said, "But they didn't kill everyone. And after they went away, I got off towards Walton across the fields. But it's not 16 days altogether, and your hair is gray." He looked over his shoulder suddenly. "Only a rook," he said. "One gets to know that birds have shadows these days. This is a bit open. Let us crawl under those bushes and talk." "Have you seen any Martians?" I said, since I crawled out. "They've gone away across London," he said. "I guess they've got a bigger camp there. Of a night, all over there, Hampstead way, the sky is alive with their lights. It's like a great city, and in the glare you can just see them moving. By daylight you can't. But near, I haven't seen them." He counted on his fingers. 5 days? Then I saw a couple across Hammersmith way, carrying something big. And the night before last," he stopped and spoke impressively. It was just a matter of lights. But it was something up in the air. I believe they've built a flying machine and are learning to fly. I stopped, on hands and knees, for we had come to the bushes. Fly. Yes, he said, fly. I went on into a little bower and sat down. It is all over with humanity, I said. If they can do that, they'll simply go round the world. He nodded. They will, but it will relieve things over here a bit. And besides, he looked at me. Aren't you satisfied it is up with humanity? I mean, we're down. We're beat. I stared. Strange as it may seem, I had not arrived at this fact. A fact perfectly obvious so soon as he spoke. I had still held a vague hope. Rather, I had kept a lifelong habit of mind. He repeated his words. We're beat. They carried absolute conviction. It's all over, he said. They've lost one, just one, and they've made their footing good and crippled the greatest power in the world. They've walked over us. The death of that one at Weybridge was an accident, and these are only pioneers. They kept on coming. These green stars, I've seen none these 5 or 6 days, but I have no doubt they're falling somewhere every night. Nothing is to be done. We're under. We're beat. I made him no answer. I sat staring before me, trying in vain to devise some countervailing thought. This isn't a war, said the artilleryman. It never was a war, any more than there's war between man and ants. Suddenly, I recalled the night in the observatory. After the 10th shot, they fired no more, at least until the first cylinder came. How do you know? Said the artilleryman. I explained. He thought. Something wrong with the gun, he said. But what if there is? They'll get it right again. And even if there's a delay, how can it alter the end? It's just men and ants. There's the ants. There's the ants builds their cities. Their cities live their lives, have wars, revolutions, until the men want them out of the way, and then they go out of the way. That's what we are now, just ants, only... Yes, I said. We're eatable ants. I guess they hadn't invented the word edible. We sat looking at each other. And what will they do with us, I said. That's what I've been thinking, he said. That's what I've been thinking. After Weybridge, I went south thinking. I saw what was up. Most of the people were hard at it, squealing and exciting themselves, but I'm not so fond of squealing. I've been in sight of death once or twice, and I am not an ornamental soldier. And at the best and worst, death, it's just death. And it's the man that keeps on thinking comes through. I saw everyone tracking away south, says I. Food won't last this way, and I turned right back and went for the Martians like a sparrow goes for man. All round. He waved a hand to the horizon. They're starving in heaps, bolting, treading on each other. He saw my face and halted awkwardly. No doubt, lots who had money have gone away to France, he said. He seemed to hesitate whether to apologize, met my eyes, and went on. There's food all about here. Canned things in shops, wines, spirits, mineral waters, and the water mains and drains are empty. I was telling you what I was thinking. Here's intelligent things, I said. And it seems they want us for food. First they'll smash us up. Ships, machines, guns, cities. All the order and organization. All that will go. If we were the size of ants, we might pull through, but we're not. It's all too bulky to stop. That's the first certainty, eh? I assented. Is that Rowley liking the contrast of the religious man versus the military man? I don't really think of our guy as the religious man. I mean, yeah, he's prayed, he's desperate. But he's definitely more like the science man. I assented. It is, I thought out. Very well then. Next, at present, we're caught as we are caught as we are wanted. Not the zealot that died. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, okay, I see what you're doing there. Yeah, this is the military man that we are talking to, and we were previously talking to the zealot religious guy, yeah. The curate. It is. I've thought it out very well. Then, next. At present, we are caught as we're wanted. A Martian has only to go a few miles to get a crowd on the run. And I saw one day out by Wandsworth, picking houses to pieces and rooting among the wreckage. But they won't keep on doing that. So soon as they've settled all our guns and ships and smashed our railways and done all the things they're doing over there, they'll begin catching us systematically, picking the best and storing us in cages and things. That's what they will start doing in a bit. Lord, they haven't begun on us yet. Don't you see that? Not begun? I exclaimed. Not begun. All that's happened so far is through our not having the sense to keep quiet, worrying them with guns and such foolery, and losing our heads and rushing off in crowds to where there wasn't any more safety than where we were. They don't want to bother us yet. They're making their things, making all the things they couldn't bring with them, getting things ready for the rest of their people. Very likely that's why the cylinders have stopped for a bit, for fear of hitting those who are here. And instead of rushing about blind on the howl or getting dynamite on the chance of busting them up, we've got to fix ourselves up according to the new state of affairs. That's how I figure it out. It isn't quite according to what a man wants for his species, but it's about what the facts point to, and that's the principle I acted upon. Cities, nations, civilization, progress, it's all over. That game's up, we're beat. But if that is so, what is there to live for? The artilleryman looked at me for a moment. There won't be any more blessed concerts for a million years or so. There won't be any Royal Academy of Arts and no nice little feeds at restaurants. If it's amusement you're after, I reckon the game is up. If you got any drawing room manners or a dislike to eating peas with a knife or dropping H's, I don't know what AITCHES. You'd better chuck 'em away. They ain't no further use. You mean? I mean that men like me are going on living for the sake of the breed. I tell you, I'm grim set on living. And if I'm not mistaken, you'll show what insides you've got too before long. We aren't going to be exterminated, and I don't mean to be caught either, and tamed and fatted and bred like a thundering ox. Ugh, fancy those brown creepers. You don't mean to say... I do, and I'm going on under their feet. I've got it planned. I've thought it out. We men are beat. We don't know enough. We've got to learn before we've got a chance, and we've got to live and keep independent while we learn. See, that's what has to be done. Drop H's, so where'd that word go? H, you mean britches? Like, there's no H. Herb versus herb. It's AI. It's AI. Oh god, just come back here. I just get copy paste. Here we go. It's this. That's the word. That's not a word. Like what is that word? I mean, I guess I could look it up. You know, a search might tell me something. I literally have a browser in front of me. It's a noun, the letter H. It's literally the what? H is jewelry. It's H. Okay, definition and meaning from the Merriam-Webster. The letter H, word history, etymology of French hatch from vulgar Latin hatcha, first known use. Can you just tell me what it is? Spelled? That is spelled. Really? I see, okay. Well, the first known use of it was 1580, apparently, according to this website. letter H? This is so unacceptable to me. If you've got any drawing room manners or dislike to eating peas with a knife or dropping H's, you... Dropping H's? What is dropping H's? Oh, I'm getting it now. Yeah, it's all those words I hate to read. Okay, good. Get your low-class language going on. I see. That's where you're talking about high-class English before, yeah, right? Where the hell was I? He's going under feed. See what's that? So yeah. He's formulated a plan. He knows what humanity has to do to survive. I stared, astonished, and stirred profoundly by the man's resolution. Great God, cried I. But you are a man indeed. And suddenly I gripped his hand. Eh? He said, with his eyes shining. I have thought it out, eh? Go on, I said. Well, those who mean to escape their catching must get ready. I'm getting ready. Mind you, it isn't all of us that are made for wild beasts, and that's what it's got to be. That's why I watched you. I had my doubts. You're slender. I didn't know that it was you see, or just how you'd been buried. The sort of people that lived in these houses, and all those damn little clerks that used to live down that way, they'd be no good. They haven't any spirit in them. No proud dreams and no proud lusts, and a man who hasn't one or the other, Lord. What is he but funk and precautions? They just used to skedaddle off to work. I've seen hundreds of them, bit of breakfast in hand, running wild and shining to catch their little season ticket train, for fear they'd get dismissed if they didn't. Working at businesses they were afraid to take the trouble to understand, skedaddling back for fear they wouldn't be in time for dinner, keeping indoors after dinner for fear of the back streets, and sleeping with the wives they married, not because they wanted them, but because they had a bit of money that would make for safety in their... Oh, this paragraph is big. Not because they wanted them, but because they had a bit of money that would make for safety in their one little miserable skedaddle through the world. Lives insured and a bit invested for fear of accidents. And on Sundays, fear the hereafter, as if hell was built for rabbits. Well, the Martians would just be a godsend to these. Nice, roomy cages, fattening food, careful breeding, no worry. After a week or so of chasing about the fields and lands on empty stomachs, they'll come and be caught cheerful. They'll be quite glad after a bit. They'll wonder what people did before there were Martians to take care of them. And the bar loafers and the mashers and singers, I can imagine them, he said, with a sort of somber gratification. There'll be any amount of sentiment and religion loose among them. There's hundreds of things I saw with my eyes that I've only begun to see clearly these last few days. There's lots will take things as they are, fat and stupid, and lots will be worried by a sort of feeling that it's all wrong, and that they ought to be doing something. Now, whenever things are so that a lot of people feel they ought to be doing something, the weak, those who go weak with a lot of complicated thinking, always make for a sort of do-nothing religion. Very pious and superior, and submit to persecution and the will of the Lord. Very likely you've seen the same thing. Its energy in a gale of funk and turned clean inside out. These cages will be full of psalms and hymns and piety, and those of a less simple sort will work in a bit of, eroticism. That's a fascinating point of view. I'm sure some people won't like it. Those who are weak, where is it? People who will take things as they are and are too weak when it comes to complicated thinking. Yeah, and those who go weak with a lot of complicated thinking always make for a sort of do-nothing religion. Yeah, you kind of feel like that's touching on politics, perhaps. I won't go into details, but I feel like there are a lot of people in politics who or just perhaps when it comes to just people who don't like thinking about how to fix the computer, right? Same sort of broad brush, if you will, super broad brush here. Let's keep that in mind. Oh, this is complicated. I don't want to do anything about it. I'll just do something else instead, right? People who, I think it's like you and I and Bob and Jill and Jane and Terrence, we're all people. We're just the same kind of people. People think there are smart people, think people there are dumb people. This is kind of, um, we don't really have a good way of measuring intelligence, because as it turns out, the more time you spend learning about something and the way you were taught and the amount of effort you put and effort and time and attention you put into it really determines how good you are at a thing. If you want to be super really good at, say, calculus, you just have to go learn how to be really good at calculus and just do that a lot. I suck at calculus, so I didn't want to put a lot of time into it. But I think in my degree, I took almost nearly every math class 2 times. I like math. I don't dislike math, but it's complicated. And I had to spend a lot of time doing it. And I had to go through like an extra semester of doing the same math just to pass the damn course. Some of us are slower and some of us are quicker. Like that's just part of life, and that's fine. There are differences in people. Like let's not pretend that there aren't. Um, but you can learn to fix a computer if you want to spend the time doing that. I'm not saying you should or you have to. You might prefer to spend your time doing something else. Perhaps you want to get really good at drawing. I'm not going to get good at drawing because I'm spending my time doing whatever else it is that I want to do. That's fair. No one can be good at everything. But everyone who decides to not try because something feels complicated will not really get anywhere complicated. And it's the complicated places you want to be for the satisfying work or hobbies or a life that you want to live. And you find those people, um, they tend to start saying things like, they become very superior. Uh, they become very, they're lots of talk, and they're no action, right? I am superior to this, but yes, somehow I can produce no results. I'm trying not to name political stuff, but all the politics come to mind. All the politicians who talk a lot and have been shown to get nothing done, they all come to mind here, right? They want the easy path in life. They don't want to think about solutions to complicated problems, so they simplify the problems and they give one-liners and say, "This is the big problem. Why can't you fix this one thing?" It's like, well, because there are like 12 things that have to be addressed, and every time someone tries to address one of those 12 elements, they're like, "Oh, you're not even solving the problem," because to them it doesn't look like this solves the problem. And yeah. Anyways, what was this about eroticism? Yes, that's right. And those of a less simple sort will work in a bit of, what is it, eroticism. He paused. Very likely these Martians will make pets of some of them, train them to do tricks, who knows, get sentimental over the pet boy who grew up and had to be killed, and some, maybe, they will train to hunt us. No, I cried, that's impossible, no human being. What's the good of going on with such lies? Said the artilleryman. There's men who do it cheerfully. What nonsense to pretend there isn't. And I succumbed to his conviction. If they come after me, he said, Lord, if they come after me, and subsided into grim meditation. I sat contemplating these things. I could find nothing to bring against this man's reasoning. In the days before the invasion, no one would have questioned my intellectual superiority to his. I, a professed and recognized writer on philosophical themes, and he, a common soldier. And yet he had already formulated a situation that I had scarcely realized. What are you doing? I said presently. What plans have you made? He hesitated. Well, it's like this, he said. What have we to do? We have to invent a sort of life where men can live and breed. and be sufficiently secure to bring the children up. Yes, wait a bit, and I'll make it clear what I think ought to be done. The tame ones will go like all tame beasts. In a few generations, they'll be big, beautiful, rich, rich-blooded, stupid rubbish. The risk is that we who keep wild will go savage, degenerate into a sort of big savage rat. You see, how I mean to live is underground. I've been thinking about the drains. Of course, those who don't know drains think horrible things, but under this London are miles and miles, hundreds of miles, and a few days' rain, and London empty will leave them sweet and clean. The main drains are big enough and airy enough for anyone. Then there's cellars, vaults, stores, from which bolting passages may be made to the drains. And the railway tunnels and subways, eh? You begin to see, and we form a band, able-bodied, clean-minded men. We're not going to pick up any rubbish that drifts in. Weaklings go out again, as you meant me to go. Well, I parlayed, didn't I? We won. We won't quarrel about that. Go on. Those who stop obey orders. Able-bodied, clean-minded women we want also. Mothers and teachers. No lackadaisical ladies. No blasted rolling eyes. We can't have any weak or silly. Life is real again, and the useless and cumbersome and mischievous have to die. They ought to die. They ought to be willing to die. It's a sort of disloyalty, after all, to live and taint the race, and they can't be happy. Moreover, dying is none so dreadful. It's the funking makes it bad. It's the funking makes it bad. And in all those places we shall gather, our district will be London, and we may even be able to keep a watch, and run about in the open when the Martians keep away. Play cricket, perhaps. That's how we shall save the race. It's a possible thing, but saving the race is nothing in itself. As I say, that's only being rats. It's saving our knowledge and adding to it is the thing. There are men like you come in. There's books, there's models. We must make great safe places down deep and get all the books we can, not novels and poetry swipes, but ideas, science books. That's where men like you come in. We must go to the British Museum and pick all those books through. Especially, we must keep up our science, learn more. We must watch these Martians. Some of us must go as spies. When it's all working, perhaps I will. Get caught, I mean. And the great thing is, we must leave the Martians alone. We mustn't even steal. If we get in their way, we clear out. We must show them we mean no harm. Yes, I know. But they're intelligent things. And they won't hunt us down if they have all they want, and think we're just harmless vermin. This guy has become very, very dark. There is value in keeping more than just science. Keeping our culture, our stories, and our history is an important thing. We've learned that through the loss of so much of it, through our own work amongst each other's, against each other's cultures. I think it's water time. The artilleryman paused and laid a brown hand upon my arm. After all, it may not be so much we may have to learn before. After all, it may not be so much we may have to learn before. Just imagine this. 4 or 5 of their fighting machines suddenly starting off. Heat rays right and left, and not a Martian in them. Not a Martian in them, but men. Men who have learned the way how. It may be in my time even, those men. Fancy having one of them lovely things with its heat ray wide and free. Fancy having it in control. What would it matter if you smashed to smithereens at the end of the run after a bust like that? I reckon the Martians will open their beautiful eyes. Can't you see them, man? Can't you see them hurrying, puffing and blowing and hooting to their other mechanical affairs? Something out of a gear in every case, and swish, bang, rattle, swish, just as they are fumbling over it. Swish comes the heat ray, and behold, man has come back to his own. For a while, the imaginative daring of the artilleryman, and the tone of assurance and the courage he assumed, completely dominated my mind. I believed unhesitatingly both in his forecast of human destiny and in the practicability of his astonishing scheme, and the reader who thinks me susceptible and foolish must contrast his position, reading steadily with all his thoughts about his subject, and mine crouching fearfully in the bushes and listening, distracted by apprehension. We talked in this manner through the early morning time, and later crept out of the bushes, and, after scanning the sky for Martians, hurried perceptibly to the house on Putney Hill, where he made his lair. It was the coal cellar of the place, and when I saw the work he had spent a week upon, it was a burrow scarcely 10 yards long, which he designed to reach the main drain on Putney Hill. I had my first inkling of the gulf between his dreams and his powers. Such a hole I could have dug in a day, but I believed in him sufficiently to work with him all that morning until past midnight at his digging. We had a garden burrow, and shot the earth we removed against the kitchen range. We refreshed ourselves with a tin of mock turtle soup and wine from the neighboring pantry. I found a curious relief from the aching strangeness of the world in this steady labor. As we worked, I turned his project over in my mind, and presently objections and doubts began to arise, but I worked there all the morning. So glad I was to find myself with a purpose again. After working an hour, I began to speculate on the distance one had to go before the cloaca was reached, the chances we had of missing it altogether. My immediate trouble was why we should dig this long tunnel, when it was possible to get into the drain at once down one of the manholes, and work back to the house. It seemed to me, too, that the house was inconveniently chosen, and required a needless length of tunnel, and just as I was beginning to face these things, the artilleryman stopped digging and looked at me. "We're working well," he said, putting down his spade. "Let us knock off a bit," he said. "I think it's time we reconnoitered from the roof of the house." I was for going on, and after a little hesitation he resumed his spade, and then suddenly I was struck by a thought. I stopped. So did he at once. "Why were you walking about the common," I said, "instead of being here?" "Taking the air," he said. "I was coming back. It's safer by night." "But the work?" "Oh, one can't always work," he said. In a flash I saw the man plain. He hesitated, holding his spade. "We ought to reconnoiter now," he said, "because if any come near, they may hear the spades and drop upon us unawares." We're going to pause here. We have ads coming in. We will be back to continue right thereafter. We're back. Oh, let's see. As they come near, they may hear the spades and drop upon us unawares. I was no longer disposed to object. We went together to the roof and stood on a ladder, peeping out of the roof door. No Martians were to be seen, and we ventured out on the tiles and slipped down under the shelter of the parapet. From this position, a shrubbery hid the greater portion of Putney, but we could see the river below, a bubbly mass of red weed, and the low parts of Lambeth flooded and red. The red creeper swarmed up the trees about the old palace, and their branches stretched gaunt and dead, and set with shriveled leaves from amid its clusters. It was strange how entirely dependent both these things were upon flowing water for their propagation. About us, neither had gained a footing. Oh, what's this? Laburnums, pink maize, snowballs, and trees of arbor vitae rose out of laurels and this word. Hydrin. It's not It's not Hydrangreus. God, it's damn English. Laurels and plants and green and brilliant into the sunlight. Beyond Kensington, dense smoke was rising, and that of a blue haze hid the northward hills. It's hydrangeas or something. Oh, good lord! I have to look this up. I'm ashamed. Apparently, it's a genus. So it's a whole bunch of stuff. Can I get hydrangea? Hydrangea. Just go like la pronunciation. Okay, that's not how you spell pronunciation. YouTube says all the words apparently. I want your ad. Hydrangea? It's hydrangea. That's no, I don't accept this. We're striking this word from the English language. Okay, moving on. The Webster app? Yeah, maybe I should. There's an app? Remind me when I go upstairs. Take a look at it. The artilleryman began to tell me of the sort of people who still remained in London. One night last week, he said, some fools got the electric light in order, and there was all Regent Street and the circus ablaze, crowded with painted and ragged drunkards, men and women dancing and shouting till dawn. A man who was there told me. And as the day came, they became aware of a fighting machine standing nearby the Langham and looking down at them. Heaven knows how long he had been there. It must have given them some sort of a nasty turn. He came down the road towards them and picked up nearly 100 too drunk or frightened to run away. Grotesque gleam of a time no history will ever fully describe. From that, in answer to my questions, he came round to his grandiose plans again. He grew enthusiastic. He talked so eloquently of the possibility of capturing a fighting machine that I more than half believed in him again. But now that I was beginning to understand something of his quality, I could divine the stress he laid on doing nothing perceptibly. Perceptibly. And I noted that now there was no question that he personally was to capture and fight the great machine. Yeah, sell it in a different way. After a time, we went down. You know what? He probably has problems with his failure, or the failure of the military to protect humanity, and now he might feel this obligation to make up for that somehow. Putting upon himself as the army's failure is his failure, because maybe he was like survivor's guilt, I guess is kind of what I'm getting at. After a time, we went down to the cellar. Neither of us seemed disposed to resume digging, and when he suggested a meal, I was nothing loath. He became suddenly very generous, and when we had eaten, he went away and returned with some excellent cigars. We lit these, and his optimism glowed. He was inclined to regard my coming as a great occasion. It's probably lonely too. Like, it's probably just as lonely as you were. Yeah, he must die in glorious battle. Yeah, or somehow succeed crazily. I don't know. Maybe he wants to be a space marine. There's some champagne in the cellar, he said. We can dig better. We can dig better on this on this Thameside Burgundy, said I. No, he said. I am host today. Champagne, great God, we've a heavy enough task before us. Let us take a rest and gather strength while we may. Look at these blistered hands. And pursuant to this idea of a holiday, he insisted upon playing cards after we had eaten. He taught me euchre, and after dividing London between us, I had taken the northern side and he the southern, we played for parish points. Grotesque and foolish as this will seem to be, as grotesque and foolish as this will seem to the sober reader, it is absolutely true. And what is more remarkable, I found the card game and several others we played extremely interesting. Strange mind of man, that with our species upon the edge of extermination or appalling degradation, with no clear prospect before us but the chance of a horrible death, we can sit following the chance of this painted pasteboard and playing the joker with vivid delight. Afterwards he taught me poker, and I beat him at 3 tough chess games. When dark came, we decided to take the risk and lit a lamp. After an interminable string of games, we supped, and the artilleryman finished the champagne. We went on smoking the cigars. He was no longer the energetic regenerator of his species I had encountered in the morning. He was still optimistic, but it was a less kinetic, a more thoughtful optimism. I remember he wound up with my health, proposed in a speech of small variety and considerable intermittence. I took a cigar and went upstairs to look at the lights of which he had spoken that blazed so greenly along the Highgate hills. At first, I stared unintelligently across the London valley. The northern hills were shrouded in darkness. The fires near Kensington glowed redly, and now and then an orange-red tongue of flame flashed up and vanished in the deep blue night. All the rest of London was black. Then, nearer, I perceived a strange light, a pale, violet-purple fluorescent glow, quivering under the night breeze. For a space I could not understand it, and then I knew that it must be the red weed from which this faint irradiation proceeded. With that realization, my dormant sense of wonder, my sense of proportion of things awoke again. I glanced from that to Mars, red and clear, glowing high in the west, and then gazed long and earnestly at the darkness of Hampstead and Highgate. I remained a very long time upon the roof, wondering at the grotesque changes of the day. Oh, ouch. Sorry, I yanked a hair out of my nose. It hurt. I recalled my mental states from the midnight prayer to the foolish card playing. I had a violent revulsion of feeling. I remember I flung away the cigar with a certain wasteful symbolism. My folly came to me with glaring exaggeration. Yes, old. I seemed a traitor to my wife and to my kind. I was filled with remorse. I resolved to leave this strange, undisciplined dreamer of great things to his drink and gluttony, and to go on into London. There, it seemed to me, I had the best chance of learning what the Martians and my fellow men were doing. I was still upon the roof when the late moon rose. That is the end of chapter 7 of book 2. I changed my mind. We only have a little ways to go, but it's already 9 p.m. I want to get some things done. We are going to read the rest of this on a subsequent, so I guess Monday night, and we'll find some other things to do to fill in the extra time, because we are near the end. But it's just I think we're done for tonight. Well, so thank you for listening. I don't think we are going to raid. Let me just check something. I don't think so. Okay. Well, with that said, and we're going to end here. Please remember to leave your reading materials on the shelves before you depart and be kind to one another.